What if I told you that some of the greatest mysteries of our world are hidden not in lost tombs or sunken ships, but in plain sight on pieces of parchment drawn by hand centuries ago? These aren't just maps, they're gateways, windows into worlds we thought were forgotten, sketched by people who dared to imagine lands beyond the horizon, see monsters in uncharted waters, and kingdoms that shimmered just out of reach. Each of these ancient maps is more than a guide, it's a story of ambition, wonder, fear, and brilliance drawn in ink and ambition. And today, we're going to explore 30 of the most astonishing hand-drawn maps ever created, each one a masterpiece of art, a feat of science, and a riddle waiting to be unraveled. Think about it, long before satellites, GPS, or even accurate clocks, people looked at the sky, the sea, and the land, and tried to make sense of it all. They drew what they knew, what they heard in travelers' tales, what they dreamed might be real. Some of these maps guided explorers to new continents. Others held coded messages, hidden symbols, or mistakes that changed history. They weren't just practical tools, they were declarations, a way of saying, we are here. This is our world, and we are trying to understand it. When you look closely at these artifacts, you don't just see coastlines and mountains, you see hope. You see curiosity, you see the human spirit insisting there's more out there even when everything said otherwise. So join me on a journey through time, imagination, and sheer human ingenuity. We'll voyage across oceans that were once thought endless, trace the routes of adventurers who risked everything, and decode the symbols left behind by cartographers who blended science and myth into something timeless. By the end of this, you won't just see old maps, you'll feel the pulse of the past in every stroke of the pen, and you'll understand why these hand-drawn wonders are still speaking to us, whispering secrets, sparking questions, and reminding us that every explorer, in some way, starts with a blank page and the courage to fill it. Our journey begins not with a map of the known world, but a map of the understood world. The oldest known world map comes to us from a clay tablet, baked in the fires of ancient Mesopotamia over 2,600 years ago. This is the Babylonian world map, and it is a breathtaking glimpse into a completely different way of seeing our planet. At first glance, it might look simplistic, even crude, but to dismiss it would be to miss its profound genius. This isn't just a geographical chart, it's a philosophical statement, a theological diagram, and a declaration of identity, all inscribed onto a single piece of clay. The map is a circle, and right at the heart of that circle you find the city of Babylon itself, drawn as a rectangle bisected by the Euphrates River. This central placement was no accident. For the Babylonians, their city wasn't just a place on the land, it was the axis mundi, the literal center of the universe. Everything radiated out from it, both physically and spiritually. Surrounding Babylon are other regions labeled with ancient cuneiform script: Assyria, Urartu, Haban, and others, all depicted as distant circles, almost like satellite cities orbiting a great sun. They are places known through trade, warfare, and rumor, all organized in relation to the glorious center. But beyond these known lands, the map takes a fascinating turn. The entire inhabited world is encircled by a massive, ring-shaped body of water labeled the Bitter River. This wasn't just any ocean, it was the primordial saltwater sea known as Maratu, which in Babylonian cosmology represented chaos, the unknown, and the realm of the gods. It was the ultimate barrier, the end of all things, and yet, even beyond this watery barrier, the mapmaker carved 8 triangular regions. These are the Nagu, or distant islands, described in the text on the tablet as mythical places where the sun is not seen. They are literally off the map, realms of legend where heroes might journey, and where the great god Marduk might have vanquished the dragon goddess Tiamat in the epic of creation. This reveals the map's true purpose. It was less a tool for navigation and more a tool for education. It was likely used to teach scribes about Babylonian theology and their place in the cosmic order. It answered the big questions: where are we? We are at the center. What surrounds us? The known world. And what lies beyond that? The great unknown, the realm of myth and divinity. So this ancient piece of clay is a powerful reminder that every map is a product of its time and culture. It shows us not the world as it was, but the world as the Babylonians believed it to be, a world centered on their greatness, protected by their gods, and surrounded by a moat of mystery. Leaping forward in time and traveling southwest from Mesopotamia, we arrive in the golden sands of ancient Egypt. Here, we encounter a map so remarkably different in its purpose and design that it feels like it's from another world entirely. This is the Turin Papyrus map, and it is a stunningly practical, scientific document created over 3,000 years ago, around 1160 BCE. Unlike the cosmological Babylonian map, this Egyptian artifact was not concerned with theology or the edges of the known world. Its gaze was turned inward toward the earth itself, and its purpose was profoundly earthly, to find valuable stone and bring it back for a pharaoh's monument. Crafted on a scroll of papyrus, this map charts a region of the Wadi Hammamat in the eastern desert, a dry river valley that was a crucial gateway to the Red Sea and a primary source of prized Bekan stone, a dark, beautiful Greywacke sandstone used for statues and coffins of the elite. The map was essentially a tool for a state-sponsored mining expedition commissioned by the pharaoh Ramesses IV. Imagine the scene: a royal scribe, perhaps under the shade of a makeshift awning, carefully unrolling this very document to guide a team of quarry masters and laborers through the harsh, sun-baked landscape. It was a working blueprint, not a philosophical statement. What makes the Turin Papyrus so astonishing is its breathtaking accuracy and the sophisticated cartographic techniques it displays. The map is oriented with south at the top, a common practice in Egyptian maps, and it depicts the Wadi, the valley, as a winding, dark ribbon of road snaking through a landscape of towering hills. These hills are not drawn as simple triangles. They are shown in plan view from above with their shapes carefully outlined, and they are painted in vivid watercolors, pink and yellow, that correspond to the actual rock types found there. The mapmaker even used different shades to distinguish between the slopes covered in loose, black pebbles and the stable, solid bedrock beneath. Distances between the quarry, the gold mine at Bir Fawakir, and a workers' settlement are meticulously recorded in Egyptian units of measurement. A notation on the map specifically points to the location where the Bekan stone is found, and another warns of a crumbling well, a critical piece of information for survival in the desert. This level of detail reveals a mindset focused on utility, logistics, and resource management. It is a snapshot of ancient industrial planning, a direct window into the administrative genius that powered the Egyptian state. This was a map meant not to explore the unknown, but to master the known, to efficiently extract the wealth of the land and fuel the engine of their civilization. It stands as a powerful, silent testament to the fact that while some cultures mapped the heavens and the myths, others were perfecting the science of the earth right beneath their feet. Now, let's journey from the pragmatic deserts of Egypt to the sun-drenched intellectual hub of the ancient world, the Library of Alexandria. Here, in the 3rd century BCE, a scholar named Eratosthenes of Cyrene accomplished a feat so audacious, so brilliantly simple, it would fundamentally reshape humanity's understanding of our own planet and lay the very foundation of scientific mapmaking. While the Babylonians saw a world centered on their city and the Egyptians mapped for resource extraction, Eratosthenes dared to do something different. He sought to measure the entire Earth itself. His story begins with a curious piece of information. Eratosthenes, the head librarian of this great institution, had learned from travelers that in the southern Egyptian city of Sin, modern-day Aswan, on the day of the summer solstice, the sun shone directly overhead at noon. A vertical stick would cast no shadow, and sunlight would illuminate the very bottom of a deep well. Yet, in his home city of Alexandria, some 500 miles to the north, a vertical stick did cast a shadow at that exact same moment. To a lesser mind, this might have been a trivial observation, but to Eratosthenes it was the key to a cosmic mystery. He reasoned that if the sun's rays were arriving at Earth as parallel lines, which they essentially are, then the only explanation for the different angles of the shadows was that the Earth's surface must be curved. This curvature meant the distance between the two cities represented a specific fraction of the Earth's total circumference. By measuring the angle of the shadow in Alexandria, which he calculated to be about 7.2 degrees or 1/50th of a full circle, and then accurately measuring the distance between the two cities, he could perform a stunning calculation. He multiplied that distance by 50. The result was a remarkably accurate figure for the Earth's circumference, landing within a few percentage points of the actual measurement we know today. It was a breathtaking leap of logic and geometry. Armed with this newfound knowledge of the Earth's true size, Eratosthenes set out to create a new map of the oikoumene, the entire known inhabited world. This was no mere sketch. He introduced a revolutionary framework, a grid system of lines running east-west and north-south across his map. He drew a main east-west parallel line through Rhodes and a main north-south meridian through Alexandria, effectively creating the first system of latitude and longitude. This grid allowed him to plot the known locations of cities, mountain ranges, and coastlines based on accounts from travelers and earlier geographers, but now with a consistent mathematical reference frame. His map depicted the world as a single, giant landmass surrounded by a continuous ocean, stretching from the Pillars of Hercules in the west to India in the east, and from Thule in the frozen north to the land of Katagara in the mysterious south. For the first time, geography was not just about listing places next to each other. It was about understanding their precise spatial relationships on a spherical body. He transformed map-making from a descriptive art into a predictive science. Eratosthenes gave the world a new lens through which to see itself, a lens of measurement, reason, and breathtaking scale. He proved that with careful observation and brilliant deduction, the entire cosmos, starting with our own world, could be understood. Following the groundbreaking work of Eratosthenes, the torch of scientific cartography was carried forward by another intellectual giant, one whose ideas would dominate the world of maps for the next 1300 years. We now arrive in the 2nd century of the Common Era, in the vibrant Roman-Egyptian city of Alexandria, where a scholar named Claudius Ptolemy was about to create what we might call the first user's manual for the entire world. His masterpiece, the Geographia, was not merely a single map but a revolutionary 8-volume treatise that provided detailed instructions on how to draw the world accurately. This work introduced two concepts so fundamental that we barely question them today: a coordinated grid system for locating any place on Earth, and the mathematical challenge of projecting a spherical world onto a flat sheet of paper. Ptolemy's system was built on the foundational idea that the Earth was a sphere, but his genius lay in his practical application. He devised a comprehensive grid of latitude and longitude, dividing the globe into 360 degrees. He then painstakingly compiled a catalogue of over 8,000 known places, from cities and towns to mountain peaks and river mouths, and he assigned each one a specific set of coordinates based on all the available accounts from travelers, merchants, and previous geographers. This was the world's first geographical database. A cartographer in, say, Rome could now take Ptolemy's book, follow his mathematical formulas, and theoretically plot the precise location of a city in distant India or a promontory in Britannia onto their own map. It was an attempt to create a standardized, reproducible model of the entire known world, the oikoumene. But Ptolemy faced the same problem every mapmaker encounters: how to flatten a sphere. You cannot perfectly represent the surface of a globe on a two-dimensional plane without some form of distortion. Ptolemy proposed several methods of projection to solve this, the most influential being his conic projection. Imagine placing a cone over a part of the globe and then unwrapping it. This method better preserved the accuracy of shapes and distances across the vast expanse of the Roman Empire and the Mediterranean, the areas he knew best. However, this system also introduced significant errors. To fit the world into his mathematical model, Ptolemy made a crucial miscalculation. He overestimated the size of the Earth, shrinking the distance represented by each degree of longitude. Furthermore, he extended the Asian landmass much too far to the east. This combination of errors had a profound and ironic consequence. His map showed the known world as stretching from the Canary Islands in the west to a massive, overextended China and a landlocked Indian Ocean in the east. This depiction, which made the world seem smaller and the voyage west from Europe to Asia appear much shorter than it actually was, would sit dormant in libraries for centuries. But when it was rediscovered and translated into Latin during the Renaissance, it fell into the hands of explorers like Christopher Columbus. Armed with Ptolemy's authoritative but deeply flawed calculations, Columbus became convinced that sailing west to reach the Indies was a feasible plan. In this way, one of history's greatest inaccuracies directly helped spark the age of exploration, proving that even a map's mistakes can dramatically alter the course of human events. For over a millennium, Ptolemy's Geographia was the irrefutable standard, the final word on global geography. His use of coordinates and theory of projection provided an intellectual framework that was utterly unmatched. Medieval European mapmakers, who often created symbolic Mappa Mundi focused on religious narrative, largely ignored his scientific approach, but Arab scholars preserved and studied his work, refining his calculations. When it finally returned to Europe, it was a revelation. It replaced a worldview based on faith and legend with one rooted in mathematics and empirical, though sometimes flawed, data. Ptolemy didn't just give the world a map, he gave it the tools to make better maps. He established the very language of cartography, a language of lines, angles, and coordinates that we still use to find our way today. His work was a brilliant, flawed, and enduring monument to the power of human reason to organize the complexities of our world. Yet for all its practical genius, the Roman world had its own unique perspective, one beautifully captured in their most unusual and fascinating cartographic survivor. We now turn from the global sphere to a long, narrow strip of parchment, a document so strange in its shape and so rich in its detail that it feels almost like an ancient subway map for an entire empire. This is the Tabula Peutingeriana, or the Peutinger Table, and it is unlike any map we've encountered so far. Forget north, south, east, and west. This map has only one direction that matters: forward along the road. Imagine unrolling a scroll that stretches over 22 feet in length but is only about 1 foot tall. Your journey begins on the left with the British Isles and snakes its way all the way to the right, where you finally reach India, Sri Lanka, and even a note marking the Chinese city of Sears, the source of precious silk. In between, it depicts the entire sprawling Roman road network at the height of the empire. This wasn't a map for plotting a course across the open sea or understanding the curvature of the earth. This was a practical itinerary, a bureaucratic flowchart, and a traveler's essential companion, all rolled into one magnificent piece of propaganda. The map is a schematic diagram, ruthlessly sacrificing geographical accuracy for relational clarity. Distances are compressed, land masses are distorted, and the Mediterranean Sea is shrunk into a thin, wavy ribbon, a mere ditch to be crossed on the way to more important destinations. What matters here is not the shape of the coast, but the sequence of stops. Every twist and turn of the road has been straightened out into a neat line. The empire is presented as a vast, interconnected web of over 200,000 Roman miles of paved roads, all converging like capillaries onto the great arteries that lead, inevitably, to the heart of the world. the city of Rome itself depicted as a crowned figure seated on a throne. The real magic is in the tiny, colorful symbols that clutter these routes. Using a simple yet effective system of icons, the map acts as a complete travel guide for imperial officials, soldiers, and merchants. Small buildings represent towns and villages. Double towers signify more important cities. A crown marks a provincial capital, but beyond the destinations, it provides the services. A forked symbol indicates a place where two roads meet. Crucially, small house symbols label the mutations, where you could change your tired horse for a fresh one. And more elaborate building drawings denote the mansions, the full service inns where a traveler could find a bed, a meal, and a bath after a long day's journey. Next to each route, Roman numerals neatly state the distance between these points, not in a straight line, but in the actual miles you would walk or ride. This incredible document, likely a 13th century copy of a 4th century original, is a breathtaking snapshot of Roman imperial organization and mindset. It reveals an empire supremely confident in its connectivity, a world where you could, in theory, travel from the damp hills of northern England to the banks of the Ganges River and have a reasonably clear idea of where to stop for the night every step of the way. It is a map that doesn't show you the land you pass through, but the journey you undertake. It is the ultimate expression of a civilization that believed all roads truly led to Rome. While the Romans were charting their empire with pragmatic road maps, a very different kind of cartography was taking shape in the eastern Mediterranean, one that traded the logic of the state for the passion of faith. Our journey now leads us to a small church in the modern-day town of Madaba, Jordan. Here, nestled on the floor of the Church of St. George, lies one of the most breathtaking and historically significant maps to survive from the ancient world, the Madaba Mosaic Map. Created in the middle of the 6th century of the Common Era, this is not a map drawn on parchment or clay, but a magnificent work of art crafted from over 2 million pieces of vividly colored stone and glass. It is a panoramic snapshot of the Holy Land, a spiritual guidebook made literal, and a declaration of Christian identity following the Roman Empire's official adoption of the faith. The map originally measured a staggering 21 by 7 meters, though only about a quarter of it survives today. What remains is a dazzlingly detailed bird's-eye view of the region, stretching from the Nile Delta in Egypt to Phoenicia in modern-day Lebanon. Its primary purpose was not to help a traveler calculate the distance between two cities, but to guide a pilgrim through a sacred landscape connecting biblical stories to physical places. The map is oriented with east at the top, the direction of the rising sun, and most importantly, the direction from which early Christians believed the second coming of Christ would arrive. This orientation immediately signals that we are looking at a spiritual document, a map of salvation history. At the very heart of this mosaic, both geographically and symbolically, sits the city of Jerusalem. The map's depiction of the city is its crown jewel and a priceless gift to historians. It is shown in stunning, almost photorealistic detail from a tilted perspective, allowing us to see inside its walls. We can clearly make out the city's main cardo, its wide, colonnaded central street running from the north gate down through the city. We see bustling markets, public plazas, and most significantly, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the site believed to encompass both the Hill of Calvary and the Tomb of Christ. This detailed illustration, created centuries before any other known city plan of Jerusalem, has been instrumental in modern archaeological research, helping to verify the layout of the ancient city and the location of its most sacred sites. But the map's brilliance extends far beyond the city walls. The artist used a sophisticated visual language to bring the entire region to life. The Jordan River is depicted as a twisting, snaking line of blue tesserae, with fish even shown swimming away from the Dead Sea, a clever nod to its legendary saltiness. Palm trees and bridges mark important crossings and oases. Every town and village mentioned in the Bible is meticulously labeled in Greek, from the great city of Jericho, shown surrounded by palm trees, to the small village of Bethany, the home of Lazarus. Larger, more important cities like Gaza and Ashkelon are shown with towering walls and red-roofed buildings, their size on the map reflecting their theological significance rather than their physical acreage. This was a landscape where every hill, river, and town had a story, a miracle, or a parable attached to it. The Mappa map stands as a powerful testament to a world in transition. It blends the Roman cartographic tradition of depicting real places with a new Christian worldview that saw the physical world as a reflection of divine truth. For a faithful pilgrim who might never make the arduous journey to Jerusalem, walking across this mosaic floor was a form of virtual travel, a way to visually walk in the footsteps of Christ and the prophets. It is a map that doesn't just chart territory, it charts belief, making the geography of the Holy Land permanent, beautiful, and unshakable under the feet of the faithful. It transformed a church floor into a window into heaven itself. Leaving behind the sun-bleached stones of the Mappa mosaic, our journey through the art of ancient map-making now takes us to a damp, vaulted chamber in a cathedral in Hereford, England. Here, protected behind glass, hangs a monumental piece of parchment that represents the pinnacle of a completely different cartographic tradition. This is the Hereford Mappa Mundi, created around the year 1300 of the Common Era. To call it a map in the modern sense is almost a misnomer. It is less a geographical guide and more a grand encyclopedia of everything, a sweeping synthesis of history, theology, zoology, and legend, all painted onto a single, massive sheet of vellum. It is a map of the world as understood by the medieval Christian mind, and its purpose was not to get you from London to Rome, but from earth to heaven. The map's form is immediately striking. It is a perfect circle over 5 feet in diameter, depicting the world as a flat disk floating in a surrounding ocean. This circular format, known as an orbis terrarum, was a common framework for these medieval Mappae Mundi, literally, cloths of the world, but the Hereford version is the largest and most detailed to survive. At the very top of the circle, outside of the world itself, sits a commanding figure of Christ presiding over the Last Judgment, a powerful reminder that this entire creation is subject to divine authority. Just below him, angels watch over the saved, while on the opposite side, the damned are led away. This sets the stage for everything within the circle. This is not just a physical space, but a moral landscape. And at the very center of this moral and physical universe lies the city of Jerusalem. This placement is profoundly symbolic. For the medieval Christian, Jerusalem was the spiritual core of creation, the site of Christ's crucifixion and resurrection, the point where heaven and earth met. Radiating out from this holy center are the continents of the known world, Europe and Africa on the left and right, and Asia dominating the entire top half of the map. The Mediterranean Sea forms a vertical line dividing Europe from Africa, while the rivers Nile and Don form a horizontal T dividing them from Asia. This T and O structure, with the O being the surrounding ocean, gives these maps their other name, TO maps. It is a simple, elegant, and deeply symbolic framework that organized the complexities of the world into an easily understandable, faith-based diagram. But to stop at the framework is to miss the map's true wonder. The vast lands within this T and O are filled with an incredible tapestry of over 500 ink drawings and annotations. It is a bustling visual storybook. You can find the Garden of Eden, shown as a circular island at the very top of the map, complete with Adam, Eve, and the serpent. The Tower of Babel rises proudly. The mythical golden fleece hangs from a tree in Colchis. Alexander the Great is depicted listening to 2 griffons carrying him into the air to explore the heavens. This is a world where history, myth, and scripture exist simultaneously, all equally true to the viewer. the edges of the map, the places farthest from Jerusalem, become progressively more strange and perilous, reflecting a medieval belief that the unknown was synonymous with the monstrous. Here, in the margins of the world, we encounter the so-called monstrous races described by ancient writers like Pliny the Elder. There are the Cyapods, men with a single gigantic foot they use to shade themselves from the sun, the Blemii, a tribe of headless people with their faces on their chests, and the Panoti, whose ears are so large they can use them as blankets. These were not mere fantasy. To the medieval mind, they were logical possibilities at the very fringes of God's creation, serving as warnings against venturing too far from the Christian center and as proof of the marvelous diversity of God's work. The Hereford Mappa Mundi is ultimately a guide to a righteous life. It charts the path to salvation with Jerusalem as the goal. It is a visual sermon designed to be read by priests and scholars to educate a largely illiterate congregation about the scope of God's creation and their place within it. Every strange creature, every biblical event, every city from the mighty Rome to the humble Hereford itself, tucked away in the corner of England, is part of a divine plan. It is a breathtakingly ambitious work that seeks to capture the totality of human knowledge and experience within a single, sacred circle, reminding all who viewed it that to understand the world, one must first understand its creator. While the Hereford Mappa Mundi presented a world view filtered through faith and scripture, a revolutionary and far more scientific understanding of the globe was being crafted in a royal workshop on the sun-drenched island of Sicily. Here, in the vibrant and intellectually curious court of King Roger II, an extraordinary collaboration was underway between Christian and Islamic scholarship. The king, a Norman ruler known for his insatiable curiosity and his patronage of science and the arts, commissioned a project of staggering ambition to create the most accurate description of the world ever attempted. To lead this endeavor, he invited one of the greatest minds of the age, the Arab geographer and cartographer Muhammad al-Idrisi. Al-Idrisi had traveled extensively across North Africa, Anatolia, and Andalusia, gathering knowledge from both Islamic and European sources. He brought with him the accumulated geographical wisdom of the Arab world, which had preserved and expanded upon the works of Ptolemy and other Greek scholars, while adding centuries of their own observations from trade routes that stretched from the Atlantic to the Indian Ocean. For 15 years, al-Idrisi and a team of scholars interviewed navigators, studied travelogues, and cross-referenced countless accounts. The result of this monumental effort was not one map, but two complementary masterpieces: a massive silver planisphere, a circular world map engraved on a solid silver disc weighing over 300 pounds, and an accompanying book of commentary titled The Recreation for Him Who Longs to Travel Through the Wider World, more commonly known today as the Tabula Rogeriana, or the Book of Roger. Completed in the year 1154, this work represented a quantum leap in cartographic accuracy and scientific methodology. Unlike the symbolic TO maps of medieval Europe, al-Idrisi's map was rigorously based on empirical evidence and the foundational principle that the Earth was indeed a sphere. His world was divided, following Greek and Arab tradition, into 7 longitudinal climate zones, which were then subdivided into 10 longitudinal sections. This created a grid of 70 smaller, more manageable regional maps that could be studied in detail. When combined, these 70 sections formed a complete rectangular map of the known world, from the Canary Islands in the west to the Korean Peninsula in the east. The detail is breathtakingly modern. The map correctly shows the source of the Nile River in the Great Lakes of equatorial Africa, a fact not confirmed by Europeans until the 19th century. The outlines of the Mediterranean and the Black Sea are remarkably recognizable. The Iberian, Italian, and Anatolian peninsulas are clearly defined. It depicts the sprawling expanse of Asia with surprising accuracy, naming and placing cities like Baghdad, Constantinople, and Samarkand. Perhaps most impressively, it presents a far more realistic shape for the Indian subcontinent than any European map would for centuries to come. Al-Idrisi even incorporated knowledge of the Nordic regions, hinting at the lands visited by Viking explorers. What makes the Tabula Rogeriana truly revolutionary, however, is its worldview literally. Al-Idrisi broke with tradition by orienting his map with south at the top. This was not an arbitrary choice but a deliberate one, reflecting the perspective of the Arab geographers whose primary cultural and trading axis ran north-south, from the Mediterranean into Africa and the Arabian Sea. This reorientation forces the modern viewer to see the world through a different lens, challenging our own north-centric conventions. It is a powerful reminder that there is no correct way to view our planet, only cultural preferences. For its time, it was the most advanced and comprehensive geographical document in existence, a testament to what could be achieved when an enlightened ruler supported a brilliant scholar in a cross-cultural exchange of knowledge. It stood as the most accurate world map for the next 3 centuries, a silent, shimmering monument to a moment when science truly mapped the world. Yet for all the scientific precision of Roger's map, it remained largely confined to the royal court. Our next map, however, was destined for a far more public and influential role, and it would become one of the most spectacular visual encyclopedias of the medieval world. We now travel to the Mediterranean island of Majorca in the year 1375, a crossroads of Christian, Jewish, and Islamic culture, and a renowned center for the production of some of the finest navigational charts of the age. Here, a master cartographer named Abraham Cresques, a Jew working under the patronage of the King of Aragon, was commissioned to create a gift of unparalleled luxury and importance, a world atlas for the young Prince Charles of France. The result was the Catalan Atlas, a work that did not just chart coastlines. It captured the entire spirit of the late medieval age, its dreams, its fears, and its burgeoning global connections, all across 6 magnificent panels of vellum. The Catalan Atlas is a breathtaking hybrid, a fusion of 2 distinct cartographic traditions. Its foundation is that of a precise portolan chart, the practical tool used by Mediterranean sailors. These charts were renowned for their stunningly accurate coastlines, drawn from the direct experience of mariners and covered with a web of room lines, straight lines radiating from compass roses that helped a captain plot a course from one port to another. Cresques took this nautical precision and expanded it inland, filling the continents with a vibrant tapestry of information that transformed the map from a mere tool into a grand narrative. He painted the world not as it was known to a scientist, but as it was imagined by a society on the cusp of the Renaissance, hungry for knowledge of distant lands and luxuries. Walking the viewer through the atlas is like touring a medieval storybook. The panels unfold from east to west, beginning with a celestial diagram and a calendar, then sweeping across the known world. The rendering of Europe and the Mediterranean is impeccably detailed, a testament to the portolan tradition. But as the eye moves south into Africa and east into Asia, the map blossoms into a spectacle of illustration and legend. Here be not only dragons, but emperors, caravans, and unimaginable wealth. Cresques populates the Sahara Desert with a camel train following a precise trade route, and in the heart of West Africa, he depicts a scene that would have astonished its European viewers, a powerful black king seated on a golden throne, holding a massive gold nugget in his hand. This is Mansa Musa, the legendary ruler of the Mali Empire, famously known as the wealthiest man in the world. The inclusion of Mansa Musa is a deliberate and fascinating choice. By the 14th century, stories of his incredible pilgrimage to Mecca in 1324 had become the stuff of legend. He traveled with a caravan of tens of thousands, distributing so much gold in Cairo along the way that he allegedly caused inflation in the city's economy for a generation. Cresques not only illustrates this king but labels him explicitly, writing, "This black lord is called Musa Mali, lord of the black people of Mali." So abundant is the gold that is found in his country that he is the richest and most noble king in all the land. This was more than just a drawing. It was a data point on global economics, a signal to European princes that immense wealth lay not just in the east, but also in the seemingly impenetrable south. Beyond the gold of Mali, the atlas teems with life and commerce. The Silk Road wins its way across Asia, marked by illustrations of merchants and their pack animals. The Indian Ocean is filled with detailed depictions of traditional Arab dhows and European trading cogs, their sails billowing. Mythical elements persist. The mountains of the moon are shown as the source of the Nile, and the Red Sea is painted a literal bright red, but they are placed alongside remarkably accurate information, likely gleaned from Jewish and Islamic traders who formed networks stretching across the known world. The Catalan Atlas stands as a monumental achievement of cultural synthesis. It is a map that looks both forward and backward, honoring the practical needs of navigation while eagerly embracing the stories, both real and imagined, that defined a world rapidly expanding its horizons. It offered its royal viewer a vision of global connectivity, a world linked not just by sea lanes, but by the universal language of trade, power, and human curiosity. While European mapmakers were slowly emerging from a world defined by faith and legend, a revolutionary cartographic achievement was being unveiled on the other side of the globe, one that would present a startlingly comprehensive and sophisticated vision of the entire Eurasian continent. In the year 1402, in the royal court of the Joseon dynasty in Korea, a team of scholars completed a map of such staggering scope and accuracy that it remains one of the most important artifacts in the history of cartography. This is the Cangnedo map, formerly known as the Map of Integrated Lands and Regions of Historical Countries and Capitals. Its very existence shatters the outdated notion that advanced geographical knowledge was solely a Western pursuit, revealing instead a vibrant exchange of information flowing along the Silk Road. The Cangnedo is a massive map, originally measuring over 160 centimeters in width, painted on silk. Its perspective is uniquely East Asian, placing the Middle Kingdom China firmly at the center of the world. Korea is depicted prominently and with flattering accuracy to the east, while Japan hangs off the coast, somewhat smaller and less detailed, a subtle nod to the political and cultural hierarchy as seen from the Korean court. But the map's true genius lies in its westward gaze. It doesn't stop at the borders of China. It pushes onward, charting the vast expanse of Central Asia, the Middle East, and most astonishingly, the entire continent of Africa, which is drawn with a recognizably triangular shape pointing south. This incredible detail is a direct result of the map's synthetic nature. The Korean cartographers, led by officials Kwon Kun and Yi Ho, did not work in isolation. They openly credited their sources, which included Chinese maps from the Ming Dynasty, and most significantly, a world map brought to Korea by Islamic merchants. This Islamic map itself would have been the product of the rich geographic tradition nurtured by scholars like Al-Idrisi, incorporating knowledge from Arab traders who had sailed the coast of Africa and connected with empires across the Sahara. The Cangnedo is therefore a powerful physical document of pre-modern globalization, a beautiful fusion of Chinese, Korean, and Islamic cartographic knowledge onto a single sheet of silk. The world it presents is one of intricate complexity and surprising accuracy. A dense web of rivers, including the Huanghe and the Yangtze, crisscross China. The Great Wall snakes its way across the northern frontier. Hundreds of place names are meticulously labeled, from familiar Chinese cities to distant, almost mythical locations like the Land of the Blacks in Africa and the Country of the Franks in Europe. The Arabian Peninsula is clearly identifiable, and the Nile River is shown with its characteristic fan-shaped delta, while the proportions of Europe are still squashed and distorted, placing Rome and Arabia bizarrely close together. The mere inclusion of these places demonstrates a consciousness of a world far beyond the Middle Kingdom. This map was not meant for navigation or trade. It was a diplomatic and scholarly instrument, a symbol of the Joseon court's intellectual sophistication, and its claim to be a central pillar of a civilized world order. For the Korean kings, possessing such a complete picture of the lands and peoples from Japan to Africa was a source of immense prestige and strategic power. It allowed them to understand their place within a vast network of empires and cultures. The Gangnedo map stands as a magnificent testament to a moment when East Asian cartography was arguably the most advanced in the world, offering a panoramic view of the globe that European monarchs could only dream of for another century. It is a silent witness to the fact that long before European explorers set sail, the continents were already connected by threads of knowledge, trade, and a shared human desire to map the immense and wonderful world. Yet, even as the Gangnedo presented a comprehensive view of the Old World from an East Asian perspective, another map was being crafted in the bustling Ottoman port city of Gallipoli that would fuse this Eastern knowledge with startling new discoveries from the West, all while creating one of history's most enduring cartographic mysteries. Enter the Piri Reis map of 1513. This is not a complete world map, but a fragment, a tantalizing piece of parchment that survived centuries of obscurity only to be rediscovered in 1929 during the renovation of Istanbul's Topkapi Palace. What makes this fragment so electrifying is not just what it clearly shows, but what some believe it might hint at, sparking debates that continue to this very day. The map was the work of an Ottoman admiral and cartographer named Piri Reis, whose name literally means Captain Piri. He was a seasoned sailor, a veteran of naval battles across the Mediterranean, and crucially, a passionate collector of maps. In the elaborate notes he wrote on the map itself, Piri Reis openly credits his sources. He states that he compiled this world chart from 20 older maps, including 8 Ptolemaic maps from the time of Alexander the Great, 4 Portuguese maps of recent origin, an Arabic map of Asia, and most intriguingly, what he calls a map drawn by Christopher Columbus. This last source is what gives the map its immediate historical weight. Piri Reis claims he obtained a Columbus map from a Spanish sailor captured by his uncle, the Ottoman corsair Kemal Reis, suggesting the Ottomans had access to the most cutting-edge, classified geographical intelligence from their European rivals. The surviving fragment depicts the Atlantic Ocean with the western coasts of Europe and Africa on the right, and the newly discovered shores of the Americas on the left. The accuracy of certain sections is remarkable for its time. The coast of Brazil is rendered with surprising detail, and the map includes annotations about the climate, animals, and indigenous peoples of the New World, based on the accounts of Portuguese explorers. It shows the islands of the Caribbean with care, and even includes a drawing of Columbus's ships off the coast of Hispaniola. For historians, this alone makes it an invaluable document, a snapshot of how the Ottoman Empire, a major world power, was rapidly assimilating and responding to the seismic shifts of the Age of Discovery. But the true controversy, the element that has fueled decades of speculation and theory, lies at the very bottom of the fragment. Below the tip of South America, the map shows a landmass. Piri Reis labels this coastline, but the annotation is damaged. Some researchers, most notably in the mid-20th century, looked at the shape of this land and proposed a radical idea, that it was a representation of the continent of Antarctica, specifically its Queen Maud Land region, and even more astonishingly, that it appeared to show the topography of the continent not as it is today, buried under miles of ice, but as it might have looked thousands years ago, ice-free. This interpretation gave rise to a host of extraordinary theories, suggesting that the map's ancient sources must have been based on knowledge from a lost, advanced civilization capable of global mapping in a remote prehistoric era. Mainstream scholarship offers a more grounded, though no less fascinating, explanation. Most cartographers and historians argue that this mysterious southern land is far more likely a composite, a cartographer's best guess. It could represent the hypothetical Terra Australis Incognita, a vast southern continent that had been a feature of European geographical theory since Ptolemy, a place believed to exist to balance the landmasses of the northern hemisphere. Alternatively, it might be a distorted, early attempt to chart the southern extent of South America, perhaps merging it with rumors of the Tierra del Fuego archipelago or even sightings of the Antarctic peninsula, which Portuguese explorers might have glimpsed in earlier, unrecorded voyages. The map's unique Portolan-style construction, which often involved piecing together coastal profiles from different sources, could easily have resulted in such a conjectural landform. The Piri Reis map thus exists in two parallel realities. In one, it is a priceless historical artifact that demonstrates the incredible transfer of knowledge across cultures and faiths in the early 16th century, a tangible link between Ottoman, European, and Arab cartography. In the other, it is a cryptic puzzle, a piece of evidence for a forgotten chapter in human history. Regardless of which interpretation one leans towards, the map's power is undeniable. It is a beautiful, hand-drawn testament to the fact that every map is a cultural collage, built from layers of information, rumor, theory, and first-hand experience. It captures a specific moment when the world was simultaneously becoming more known, and yet was still filled with enormous, tantalizing blanks, inviting every viewer to wonder what secrets might still be hidden in the lines of an ancient chart. Just a few years after Piri Reis compiled his enigmatic chart from a mosaic of sources, a German cartographer working in a small town in France would synthesize all of these emerging discoveries into a single, breathtaking document that would permanently rename the world. In the town of Saint Dié Vosges in 1507, a scholarly circle known as the Gymnasium Vosges was hard at work on an ambitious project. Their goal was to create a new, updated edition of Ptolemy's Geographia that would incorporate the shocking new reports coming from across the Atlantic. The man leading this cartographic effort was Martin Waldseemüller, and the map he produced, a large woodcut print composed of 12 separate panels, would become one of the most important and influential maps in history. This was the moment the New World was given a name, and the moment it was truly understood as a new continent. Waldseemüller and his colleagues had access to the most cutting-edge geographical information available, most notably the accounts of the Florentine explorer Amerigo Vespucci. While Columbus died believing he had reached the outer islands of Asia, Vespucci's published letters, which circulated widely in Europe, proposed a radically different idea. He described these lands as a mundus novus, a new world, a continent entirely separate from Asia. This idea was a geographical revolution, and Waldseemüller, convinced by Vespucci's arguments, chose to enshrine it on his map. In a fateful decision, he also chose to honor Vespucci. On the southern part of this new landmass, in what we now know as Brazil, he printed the name America, a feminized Latin version of Amerigo. In an accompanying book, Cosmographie Introductio, he explained his reasoning. Since both Europa and Asia received their names from women, I see no reason why we should not call this other part Amerige, the land of Amerigo, or America, after its discoverer, Amerigo. The map itself, officially titled Universalis Cosmographia, was a stunning synthesis of old knowledge and audacious new speculation. For the first time on a printed map, the entire world is presented as a 360-degree sphere, clearly separated from the Asian continent by a vast, open ocean. Waldseemüller depicted the New World with a level of clarity that was unprecedented. South America is rendered with a recognizable shape, though its western coast remains a blank, unexplored mystery. North America is more tentative, shown as a narrow sliver of land separated from South America by a distinct isthmus. Most revolutionary of all is the presence of that ocean, which Waldseemüller clearly labels Oceanus Occidentalis, the Western Ocean. We know it today as the Pacific. This was a staggering leap of cartographic intuition, as no European had yet seen or crossed this vast body of water. He inferred its existence based on the scale of the new southern continent and the ancient writings of Marco Polo, correctly deducing that a massive sea must lie between the New World and Asia. Yet for all its revolutionary vision, the Waldseemüller map was also a prisoner of its time. The cartographer still clung to certain Ptolemaic errors, depicting India as a large peninsula and showing Ceylon wildly out of proportion. Japan is placed oddly far south, and a phantom island named Zipangri floats in the ocean. The map's projection, a modified cordiform or heart-shaped design, was innovative but also distorted the sizes and relationships of the landmasses. Despite these imperfections, the overall statement was clear and earth-shattering. Here was a map that said, in no uncertain terms, that the world was much larger than anyone had previously dreamed, and that it contained two entirely new continents utterly unknown to the ancients. The legacy of this map is as fascinating as its creation. It was a commercial product, and only 1,000 copies were printed. For centuries, it was believed lost to history, until in 1901, the sole surviving copy was discovered folded inside a portfolio in a German castle library. That single sheet of paper, now housed in the Library of Congress, is often called America's birth certificate. Ironically, Waldseemüller himself seems to have later had second thoughts about naming the continent after Vespucci. In his later maps, he replaced America with Terra Incognita or Terra Nova, perhaps feeling that Columbus deserved the primary credit, but it was too late. The name America, printed so boldly on that 1507 map, had already captured the imagination of Europe and began to stick. The Waldseemüller map stands as a monumental pivot point in human thought, the document where medieval geography finally gave way to the modern understanding of our planet, a world forever enlarged and forever renamed. But while Waldseemüller was theorizing about a vast Western Ocean from his workshop in France, the Portuguese were actively charting that very world, their ships carving paths through unknown waters, and their cartographers creating documents of immense strategic value, documents so secret that obtaining one was an act of high-stakes espionage. This brings us to the Cantino Planisphere of 1502, a map that isn't just a beautiful artifact. It is a story of intrigue, a snapshot of a world divided, and perhaps the greatest cartographic heist in history. This map was not commissioned for public display or scholarly debate. It was stolen on the orders of an Italian duke, and it reveals with stunning clarity the cutting-edge geographical knowledge that Portugal, the world's first true maritime empire, was desperate to keep to itself. The map is named not for its creator, who remains anonymous, but for its smuggler, Alberto Cantino, an agent working for Ercole d'Este, the Duke of Ferrara. At the time, Portugal guarded its nautical charts with paranoid intensity. They were considered state secrets, vital to maintaining their monopoly on the immensely profitable spice trade and their exploratory routes around Africa. Possessing one without authorization was a crime punishable by death. Yet Cantino, operating undercover as a horse trader, managed to bribe a Portuguese chartmaker, or perhaps even pilfer the work directly from the Crown's own Casa do India, paying a small fortune to have this magnificent map created and then smuggled out of Lisbon. The map was his intelligence coup, a way for his duke to see what only the Portuguese king and his closest advisors were permitted to see, and what it shows is nothing short of revolutionary. The Cantino Planisphere is one of the earliest maps to accurately depict the findings of Portugal's explorers, rendering the world with a confident new understanding. The coast of Africa is traced with breathtaking precision, a direct result of the voyages of Bartolomeu Dias and Vasco da Gama. For the first time on any surviving map, we see the full, bulbous shape of the continent, with the southern tip clearly rounded and the route to the Indian Ocean laid wide open. The map is filled with detailed annotations along the African coast, noting trading posts, kingdoms like Benin famous for its brass art, and the locations of gold and ivory. turning the coastline into a literal treasure map of commercial opportunities. But the map's true political bombshell lies in the Atlantic. Here, the planisphere vividly illustrates the New World, specifically the coast of Brazil, which Portuguese explorer Pedro Alves Cabral had officially claimed for his king just 2 years earlier. The Brazilian coastline is rendered with a surprising amount of detail, bulging eastward into the Atlantic, and cutting vertically through that ocean from pole to pole is a thin, straight line. This is the line of demarcation, the audacious result of the Treaty of Tordesillas of 1494. Brokered by the Pope to prevent war between the two great Catholic powers, this treaty divided the entire unknown world between Spain and Portugal. Everything to the east of the line, including Africa, India, and Brazil, was declared Portugal's domain. Everything to the west, which would turn out to include the rest of the Americas, was allotted to Spain. The Cantino planisphere is the first map to physically draw this line, making a theoretical papal decree a tangible reality on parchment. It was a powerful piece of propaganda, a visual declaration of Portuguese sovereignty over these newfound lands and sea routes. For the Duke of Ferrara, receiving this map was like receiving a stolen intelligence briefing. It showed him precisely where the boundaries of empire lay, where future conflicts might erupt, and where incredible wealth was up for grabs. The map is a breathtaking window into the dawn of global imperialism, a time when the fate of continents could be decided by a line drawn on a chart in Europe. It captures the precise moment when the ocean stopped being a barrier and became a territory to be claimed, divided, and conquered. Yet even as the Cantino planisphere was being smuggled out of Portugal, the royal cartographers in Lisbon were already at work on even more lavish and detailed productions, intended not for spies but for the eyes of a king. Just 17 years later, the Portuguese map-making tradition reached its absolute zenith with the creation of a work of such breathtaking beauty and exhaustive detail that it remains one of the most splendid cartographic treasures of the Renaissance. This is the Miller Atlas, also known as the Atlas of Lopo Homum, completed in 1519 for King Manuel I of Portugal, a monarch who so reveled in his nation's discoveries that he proudly took the title Lord of the Conquest, Navigation, and Commerce of Ethiopia, Arabia, Persia, and India. The Atlas is a world unto itself, a series of large portolan charts bound together in book form, each page a masterpiece of ink, paint, and gold leaf. As a navigational tool, it represents the pinnacle of the portolan tradition. The coastlines of the world, from Brazil to the Spice Islands, are rendered with a precision that could only come from the meticulously guarded rutters or sailing directions of Portuguese pilots who had actually sailed these routes. A dense web of room lines radiates from 32 intricately decorated windroses, creating a spiderweb of possible courses across the vellum. A ship's captain could have used these charts to plot a course from Lisbon to Calicut with confidence, following the accurate depictions of capes, bays, and river mouths that were the true currency of empire. But this was no ordinary pilot's guide, left to be stained with salt water and sweat on the deck of a carrack. This was a royal commission, a symbol of immense prestige meant to be displayed in a palace, to be pored over by diplomats and nobles, and to serve as a permanent visual record of the global empire Manuel ruled. The mapmakers Lopo Homum, Pedro Reynel, and his son Jorge Reynel were not just draftsmen, they were artists. They transformed the functional lines of a sea chart into a sprawling, illuminated manuscript of the Age of Discovery. The oceans, once empty spaces on a chart, are now teeming with life and activity. Majestic Portuguese carracks and nimble caravels, their sails billowing and flags flying, navigate the waves. These aren't generic ships, they are depicted with meticulous attention to the rigging and design that made them the marvels of their age. The lands, too, erupt with color and narrative. Instead of leaving the interiors blank, as on a standard portolan, the artists filled them with a vibrant encyclopedia of the world's wonders. In Brazil, brilliantly plumed macaws perch in trees, and tribes of the Tupinamba people are shown in dynamic scenes of daily life, hunting, dancing, and battling. One particularly striking illustration shows a cannibalistic ritual, a direct reflection of the reports that both horrified and fascinated European readers. In Africa, elephants, lions, and fantastical creatures roam the interior, while a regal figure representing the Emperor of Benin holding a spear sits enthroned in a grand pavilion, a nod to the powerful and wealthy kingdoms Portuguese traders encountered. The chart of the Indian Ocean and Southeast Asia is especially rich, showing the key trading ports of the Estado da India, the fortress of Ormuz controlling the Persian Gulf, and the precious spice islands themselves, the ultimate prize of all this exploration, often depicted with illustrations of the clove and nutmeg trees that grew there. Every element of the Miller Atlas is designed to proclaim one singular message: the utter dominance of the Kingdom of Portugal. The flags of the Order of Christ, the crusading order that financed many of the voyages, fly from castles and ships across the globe. The precise delineation of territories reinforces the claims made by the line of demarcation on maps like the Cantino Planisphere. This was a cartographic coronation for King Manuel, proof that he was indeed the master of a worldwide commercial network that stretched across every known ocean. It is a map that celebrates not just the geography of discovery, but the human experience of it, the strange animals, the diverse cultures, the perilous voyages, and the staggering wealth that flowed back to Lisbon. It stands as the most glorious and opulent portrait of a moment when a small nation on the edge of Europe, through a combination of nautical skill, ruthless ambition, and artistic genius, truly believed it had mapped and now owned the corners of the world. While the Portuguese and Spanish were fiercely dividing the newly discovered world between themselves, a remarkable and enigmatic school of cartography was flourishing far from the Iberian Peninsula in the northern French port town of Dieppe. Throughout the mid-16th century, a group of master chartmakers working for wealthy patrons and Norman ship owners produced a series of lavishly illustrated world maps that stand as some of the most beautiful and controversial artifacts of the Renaissance. These are the Dieppe maps, and their most startling feature is the repeated, detailed depiction of a vast landmass in the southern hemisphere, a land that looks unmistakably like Australia, appearing on European charts a full 2 centuries before Captain James Cook's legendary voyage. The most famous of these is the 1550 map by Pierre de Selliers, a breathtaking work of art intended for a king. Like the Miller Atlas, it is a planisphere meant to be spread out on a table and admired. It is a visual encyclopedia with inland areas filled with illustrations of kings on thrones, exotic animals, and bustling cities. The coastlines of Europe, Africa, and the Americas are rendered with the latest knowledge, but it is the bottom of the map that commands attention. Below the islands of Southeast Asia lies a massive, mysterious continent labeled as Jave la Grande. Its western coastline is deeply indented with gulfs and bays, and its northern shores show what appear to be recognizable features: a large peninsula that could be Arnhem Land, and a deep gulf that bears a striking resemblance to the Gulf of Carpentaria. This was not an isolated instance. This same great southern land appears again and again across the deep school corpus, on the Harleian map of the 1530s, the Dauphin map of the 1540s, and others. The consistency of its portrayal is what makes it so compelling. It's not a random blob or a theoretical terra australis. It has a specific, repeated shape with intricate, seemingly surveyed coastlines. The maps even include Portuguese and Malay place names along its northern edge, such as Cost des Herbages, Coast of Herbages, and Terre des Perroquets, Land of Parrots, descriptions that would fit the botanical and zoological reality of northern Australia. This level of detail strongly suggests that these French cartographers were not merely guessing or copying ancient myths. They were working from something far more concrete: first-hand geographic intelligence. The million-dollar question, of course, is where did this intelligence come from? The deep map makers themselves credited their sources in annotations, pointing squarely to Portuguese and Spanish originals. The most widely accepted theory is that Javes La Grande represents the coastline of Australia, as charted by a secret Portuguese voyage in the early 16th century. After the Treaty of Tordesillas, Portugal had the Eastern Hemisphere as its domain, and it's entirely plausible that a caravel, blown off course while sailing the Carrera da India to the Spice Islands, could have been swept onto the northwestern coast of Australia. To maintain their strategic advantage and not alert their Spanish rivals, the Portuguese would have classified this discovery as a state secret, but the knowledge may have slowly leaked out through captured pilots, shared rutters, or the work of spies, eventually making its way to the cosmopolitan port of Dieppe. Another fascinating theory points closer to home to a possible French expedition. The Dieppe maps were made for admirals and kings who were financing their own voyages of exploration, eager to break the Iberian monopoly. Some historians speculate that a Norman or Breton ship, perhaps under the command of the explorer Binot Paulmier de Gonville, may have reached the shores of Javes La Grande as early as 1504. Gonville later claimed he had discovered a southern land, though his descriptions are often argued to fit better with Madagascar or Brazil. Regardless of whose sailors first set foot there, the Dieppe maps serve as silent, beautiful, and incredibly detailed witnesses. They are the ghost in the machine of cartographic history, a persistent, detailed outline of a continent that should not have been on any European map for another 200 years. They challenge the traditional British-centric narrative of Australian discovery and open a captivating window into a shadowy era of pre-Cook exploration, reminding us that the maps of the past often hold secrets that we are still trying to decode. Yet for all the intrigue of the Dieppe maps and their hints of a southern continent, a far more practical and enduring cartographic revolution was brewing in the Low Countries, one that would solve a centuries-old problem for sailors and, in doing so, permanently reshape our visual perception of the entire world. We now arrive in the bustling Flemish city of Duisburg in 1569, where a brilliant scholar and engraver named Gerardus Mercator unveiled a new world map of such ingenious design that its underlying framework would outlive empires and become the default view of our planet for centuries to come. This was not merely a new map, it was a new navigation system, a mathematical masterpiece crafted on 18 separate sheets. Its official title was a mouthful: a new and more complete representation of the terrestrial globe properly adapted for use in navigation. History, however, would remember it by its creator's name and its transformative technique, the Mercator projection. Mercator's goal was not to make the world look right, but to make it work right for the people who needed it most, mariners. For centuries, sailors had faced a maddening problem. On a spherical Earth, the shortest distance between 2 points is a great circle route, but to follow such a curved path using a magnetic compass which points to true north required constant, tedious adjustments to the ship's heading. What a navigator desperately needed was a chart where a straight line, known as a room line or loxodrome, would cross all meridians of longitude at the exact same angle. This would allow a captain to simply set a constant compass bearing and sail in a straight line on the map to reach their destination. The challenge was representing this spherical course on a flat piece of paper. Mercator's brilliant solution was a feat of mathematical elegance. His projection treated the world as if it were enclosed within a cylinder. Imagine wrapping a large sheet of paper around the globe, touching it only at the equator. Then project every point on the sphere outward onto this cylinder, and finally unroll the cylinder to create a flat map. To preserve the angles necessary for accurate room lines, Mercator had to gradually stretch the distances between lines of latitude as they moved away from the equator toward the poles. This stretching is minimal near the equator but becomes exponentially dramatic near the poles. The result was a map where all lines of longitude are parallel, vertical lines, and all lines of latitude are parallel, horizontal lines, creating a perfect grid of right angles. For a sailor, this was magic. They could now draw a straight line between any two ports, measure its angle relative to the grid's north, and set that single, constant compass course for the entire voyage. But this navigational miracle came with a profound and largely unintended cosmological cost. The very mathematical stretching that created the perfect grid for navigation wildly distorted the actual sizes of land masses. Areas near the poles became massively enlarged compared to their true proportions. On a Mercator map, Greenland appears to be roughly the same size as the entire continent of Africa. In reality, Africa's land area is 14 times larger than Greenland's. Antarctica is stretched into a massive, unrecognizable white ribbon along the entire bottom edge of the map, while countries near the equator, like India and Brazil, appear significantly smaller than they truly are. This wasn't a mistake, it was an inherent, unavoidable trade-off of the projection's design. For Mercator, a man of science and practicality, this visual distortion was an acceptable price to pay for saving lives and cargo at sea. The legacy of the Mercator projection is a complex tapestry of utility and perception. For over 4 centuries, it was the unrivaled standard for nautical charts, enabling the age of global trade and exploration with a reliability never before known. Its clear, rectangular grid also made it the perfect choice for wall maps in schools and classrooms, especially during the height of European colonial empires. The projection's inherent tendency to exaggerate the size of northern nations like Canada, the United States, and Russia subtly reinforced a geopolitical worldview centered on these powers, while diminishing the apparent scale and thus the perceived importance of the global South. It wasn't until the late 20th century that this cartographic bias was widely challenged, leading to the promotion of alternative projections like the Peters, which accurately represents land area, or the Robinson, which seeks a compromise between shape and size. Yet despite these critiques and the advent of digital GPS that can plot great circle routes instantly, the ghost of Mercator's 450-year-old invention is still with us. Open any web mapping service today, and you are almost certainly looking at a variant of the Mercator projection. Its ability to present the world as a seamless, zoomable grid makes it ideally suited for the digital age, even as we understand its distortions. Gerardus Mercator gave us a map that made the oceans safe for navigation, but in doing so, he also gave us a specific and permanently skewed portrait of our world, a portrait that prioritized the straight path over the true proportion, and in the process forever changed how we see ourselves on the planet. But even as Mercator was perfecting his revolutionary projection for sailors, a different kind of cartographic genius was at work just a short distance away in the city of Antwerp. There, a scholar and antiquarian named Abraham Ortelius was approaching the problem of the world from an entirely new angle. He was less an original mathematician and more a master synthesizer, a brilliant editor of the world's knowledge. In 1570, he published a book that would forever change how people owned, held, and understood global geography. This was the Theatrum Orbis Terrarum, the theater of the world. It was not merely a book of maps, it was the very first modern atlas, and its centerpiece was a magnificent world map that compiled, compared, and critically evaluated all the best geographical knowledge of the age into a single, authoritative vision. Ortelius's revolutionary idea was one of consistency and compilation. Before the Theatrum, maps were individual objects, often published as separate sheets that could be bound together inconsistently or displayed as individual wall hangings. A traveler might own a map of France from one source and a map of Germany from another, drawn to different scales with conflicting details and no way to see their proper relationship to one another. Ortelius changed all of that. He gathered the finest available maps from cartographers like Mercator, Gastaldi, and others. and then had them systematically redrawn to a uniform size and style by a team of engravers. He then bound these 53 maps together in a single, massive volume, creating a harmonious and comprehensive geographical reference work where every page was designed to be in conversation with the next. His world map, which served as the grand opening to this volume, is a stunning snapshot of 16th century understanding, a world poised between ancient myth and modern discovery. Ortelius took Mercator's recent work and built upon it, but his goal was different. Where Mercator sought a perfect navigational tool, Ortelius aimed for the most accurate and plausible representation of the Earth's landmasses for an educated reader. He dramatically reduced the long-standing Ptolemaic errors that had persisted for over a millennium. Asia is no longer stretched to an impossible length, and the Indian Ocean is finally open, no longer landlocked as Ptolemy had insisted. The Mediterranean Sea, for so long exaggerated in length, is drawn with a much more correct proportion, shrinking the overall size of Europe to its proper scale relative to the rest of the globe. The treatment of the Americas is where Ortelius's critical eye truly shines. South America finally loses its distorted, bulging shape that had plagued earlier maps and takes on a form we would recognize today, complete with the pointed southern tip of Tierra del Fuego. North America, while still a work in progress, is a fascinating blend of known coastlines and hesitant conjecture. California is correctly shown as a peninsula, not yet the island it would mistakenly become in later centuries. The Pacific Northwest is a blank space labeled terra incognita, our honest admission of ignorance. Perhaps most intriguingly, he depicts a vast, open strait separating Asia from America. The Strait of Anian, a hopeful concept for a northwest passage that would captivate explorers for centuries. This was not wild guesswork, it was a reasoned hypothesis based on the best accounts available. Beyond the coastlines, the map is rich with detail that reveals Ortelius's scholarly mind. The oceans are adorned with sailing ships and sea monsters, but these are not merely decorative. In the southern Pacific, he illustrates a massive, hypothetical continent labeled Terra Australis non dum cognita, the southern land not yet known. This belief in a counterbalancing continent was a powerful geographical theory dating back to the Greeks, and Ortelius includes it, but crucially, he depicts it with a broken coastline, suggesting its exact form was still undefined and open to exploration. In the corners, elegant cartouches hold the title and dedication, while text panels contain his sources, including a list of over 87 cartographers whose work he consulted and synthesized. This bibliography was itself a revolutionary act, a commitment to transparency and scholarly rigor. The Theatrum Orbis Terrarum was an instant and monumental success, translated into multiple languages and reprinted in numerous editions throughout Ortelius's life. It was the first time that a person of even moderate means could, in a single book on their library shelf, possess the entire world. It made geography accessible, standardized, and beautiful. Ortelius didn't just publish a collection of maps, he created a new format for knowledge itself. He gave us the atlas, a concept so fundamental we still use it today. His world map was the curtain rising on his grand theater, a performance that presented the Earth not as a jumble of fragments, but as a single, interconnected, and wondrous whole, inviting every reader to become both an audience member and an explorer. While Mercator and Ortelius were crafting their European visions of a connected globe, a very different kind of map was being drawn in the bustling port cities of southern China, a map that would remain hidden from the world for centuries, only to rewrite history when it finally emerged. Our next stop is the early 17th century, in the final decades of China's Ming dynasty. This was an era of immense maritime activity where vast Chinese trading junks, some over 400 feet long, dominated the sea lanes of Asia. It is from this vibrant world of commerce and cultural exchange that the Selden map emerges, not as a tool of imperial conquest, but as a practical guide for merchants navigating the intricate web of trade that connected East and Southeast Asia. For most of the 20th century, this map was simply known as a Chinese map in the Bodleian Library at Oxford University, where it had been donated in the late 1600s by an English lawyer named John Selden. It sat there folded and misunderstood for over 300 years. Then, in 2008, a visiting historian named Robert Batchelor took a closer look. As he carefully unfurled the large, beautifully painted sheet of paper, he realized the library had been sitting on a cartographic treasure of unimaginable importance. This was not just any map, it was the earliest surviving Chinese merchant map, and it depicted the world in a way that completely upended the Western-centric narrative of map-making history. The map's most immediate and striking feature is its perspective. It is ruthlessly pragmatic, centered not on the Middle Kingdom in a symbolic display of superiority, but on the South China Sea. This body of water is rendered as the vibrant, beating heart of a vast commercial network. All the coastlines of East and Southeast Asia, from Japan and Korea in the north, down to the Indonesian archipelago in the south, and over to India in the west, are drawn with a single purpose: to show how to sail between them. The map is covered in a spiderweb of routes, over 70 in total, each one a precisely measured sailing course radiating out from the port of Quanzhou in Fujian province. Next to these routes, small, neat annotations state the travel time between points, not in abstract distance, but in the most valuable currency a merchant captain had: watches or 4-hour periods of a sailor's shift. This practical, commercial focus reveals a world that was far more interconnected than previously believed. The Selden map shows China not as a closed, insular empire, but as the central node in a complex and thriving oceanic economy. It details the intricate trade networks for porcelain, silk, spices, and silver that linked Ming China to Luzon in the Philippines, to Siam, to Malacca, and beyond. It depicts the ports where merchants of different cultures, Chinese, Japanese, Malay, Portuguese, and Spanish, would have mingled and bartered. This was a map made by someone who understood the sea not as a barrier but as a highway, and who saw the diverse cultures of Asia as trading partners in a vast cooperative enterprise. Perhaps its most revolutionary aspect, however, is its scientific underpinning. For centuries, the prevailing narrative was that Chinese maps were primarily symbolic or administrative, and that the scientific use of longitude and latitude was a European invention. The Selden map shatters this assumption. Painstaking analysis has revealed that the mapmaker employed a sophisticated system of compass bearings and a consistent scale, using a technique that incorporated magnetic declination, the difference between magnetic north and true north. This indicates a level of technical cartographic knowledge in early 17th century China that was on par with, if not in some ways more advanced than, contemporary European portolan charts. It is a powerful testament to the fact that scientific mapmaking was not a uniquely Western achievement, but a global development, with different cultures arriving at similar solutions to the problem of representing a spherical world on a flat surface. The Selden map is more than a beautiful artifact. It is a silent witness to a road not taken. It captures a moment when China was the preeminent naval power in Asia, its merchants weaving together a globalized trade network. Its rediscovery forces us to look beyond the traditional story of European exploration and acknowledge the sophisticated, cosmopolitan, and scientifically advanced world of Asian maritime commerce that existed long before European ships arrived in great numbers. It is a map that charts not just coastlines and sailing times, but an entire philosophy of connection, reminding us that history is often hidden in plain sight, waiting for the right moment to reveal a forgotten world. As the 17th century dawned, the center of the map-making universe had firmly shifted to the Dutch Republic, a nation whose wealth and power flowed directly from its mastery of the sea. In the bustling, cosmopolitan city of Amsterdam, a family firm was rising to become the most celebrated map publisher in all of Europe, the House of Blieu. And it was Joan Blieu, son of the founder Willem, who would produce what many consider the largest and most magnificent atlas ever created. His world map, a pinnacle of what is known as the Dutch Golden Age of cartography, was far more than a geographical document. It was a spectacular piece of art, a bold statement of national pride, and a dazzling encyclopedia of the known world, all rolled into one breathtaking print. Joan Blieu's world map, often published in his monumental Atlas Maya, represents the absolute zenith of the mapmaker's art as a form of luxurious decoration. To look at one of these grand folio sheets is to be overwhelmed by opulence. The map itself, already rich with the latest cartographic details from Dutch voyages of exploration, is almost upstaged by its own frame. The borders are not simple lines, they are elaborate stages upon which the entire cosmos performs. In the four corners, you will find allegorical representations of the four elements: fire, water, air, and earth, each depicted as a classical figure surrounded by appropriate symbols and creatures. Along the sides, the 7 known planets of the ancient world, the Moon, Mercury, Venus, the Sun, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, are personified, riding across the sky in their celestial chariots. But the true showstoppers are the grand vignettes that crown the top and anchor the bottom of the map. At the top, a glorious tableau celebrates the heavens themselves, with Apollo driving his sun chariot across the sky, surrounded by zodiac signs and constellations. At the bottom, the theme shifts to the wonders of the earth. Here, Blieu presents a vivid ethnographical gallery, a series of detailed scenes showing the inhabitants of the 4 continents then known to Europe: America, Asia, Africa, and Europe. A European monarch sits enthroned in majesty, symbolizing power and learning. Asian figures are shown with exotic goods, representing trade and ancient wisdom. Africans are depicted with lions and elephants, emphasizing the continent's wildlife and perceived mystery. And most fascinatingly, Americans are shown in a scene of a cannibalistic barbecue, a direct and sensationalized reflection of the travelers' tales and prejudices that fueled European imagination. This artistic splendor was backed by fiercely competitive commercial ambition and access to the very latest geographical data. The Blieu workshop was a massive operation, employing teams of engravers, artists, and geographers, all working to constantly update their plates with new information flowing into Amsterdam from the Dutch East India Company, the VOC. This was a company that literally had a government-mandated monopoly on the spice trade, and its captains and merchants were required to provide detailed maps and logs of their voyages. Blieu had a direct pipeline to this intelligence. Consequently, his maps show a world that was rapidly coming into focus. The coastlines of Australia, which the Dutch called New Holland, begin to tentatively appear, though its full extent is still a mystery. The islands of the Pacific are more accurately placed, and the outlines of the Americas are refined with each new edition. Yet for all its scientific pretension, the map is also a powerful piece of propaganda. The oceans are dominated by the billowing sails of Dutch East Indiamen, their flags flying proudly. These ships are not just decoration, they are a declaration. They announce to the viewer that the Dutch Republic, this small nation recently won from the sea, now commands the sea lanes of the world. The lavishness of the map itself was a status symbol. Owning a Blieu atlas was the ultimate sign of wealth, sophistication, and global awareness for a 17th century European gentleman. It was less a tool for navigation and more a celebration of ownership of knowledge, ownership of commerce, and by extension, ownership of the world itself. The Blieu world map is a perfect snapshot of a moment when art, science, commerce, and power converged, creating not just a map, but a masterpiece that declared its creator and its owner to be at the very center of a dazzling and expanding universe. And now we enter one of the most electrifying and contentious chapters in the entire story of ancient maps, a chapter that pits tantalizing possibility against the cold, hard glare of scientific scrutiny. Our next map doesn't come from a royal library or a church floor, but from the pages of a mysterious medieval manuscript, and it carries a claim so monumental it could rewrite history. This is the Vinland map, and if its story were true, it would be one of the most valuable documents on Earth, for it seemingly depicts the Norse exploration of North America, a land they called Vinland, over half a century before Christopher Columbus was even born. The map first surfaced in 1957, a bound volume containing a medieval manuscript titled The Tartar Relation alongside what appeared to be a unique world map. The map itself is drawn in a style reminiscent of other 15th century works, showing Europe, Asia, and Africa. But it's the addition in the upper left corner that sends a shockwave through any observer. Beyond the known islands of the North Atlantic, Iceland and Greenland drawn with surprising accuracy, the map shows a large, additional island in the Western Ocean. Two Latin inscriptions there leave no room for doubt. One reads, Island of Vinland, discovered by Bjarni and Leif in company. This is a direct reference to the Icelandic sagas, which tell of Bjarni Herjolfsson, who was blown off course and sighted unknown shores around the year 986, and Leif Erikson, who later led an expedition to explore this wooded coast, naming it Vinland for the wild grape. They found the implication was staggering. Here was a contemporary, pre-Columbian map that appeared to corroborate the Norse sagas not as mere legend but as historical fact. It suggested that knowledge of these transatlantic voyages had somehow filtered into the mainstream European geographical consciousness, perhaps through the ecclesiastical courts, and had been recorded by a skilled cartographer. When the map was presented to the world by a consortium of dealers and formally donated to Yale University in 1965, it was hailed as a sensation, a jewel of cartography that finally gave the Vikings their proper due in the discovery of America. Almost immediately, however, a chorus of doubt began to rise. The circumstances of the map's discovery were murky, its provenance before the 1950s completely untraceable. The very fact that such a revolutionary document had simply appeared out of nowhere without any historical record set off alarm bells for historians and scientists alike. The skeptics demanded to look closer, and when they did, the case for the map's authenticity began to unravel with the precision of a forensic investigation. The first and most damning blow came from the ink. In 1974, researchers using a then-new technology called electron microprobe analysis discovered that the map's distinctive yellow-brown ink contained significant amounts of the synthetic pigment titanium dioxide, specifically in the crystalline form known as anatase. This compound was not available in a pure synthetic form until the 1920s. Proponents for the map's authenticity argued that anatase could occur naturally and might have been present in some medieval inks, but subsequent, more advanced analysis, including Raman microprobe spectroscopy, consistently showed the anatase in the Vinland map ink was of a modern, industrial grade, utterly inconsistent with anything a medieval scribe could have produced. Then the parchment itself told a story. While the parchment was indeed old, carbon dated to around 1434, the map was drawn on a leaf that was clearly a later addition to the bound volume containing the Tartar relation. The wormholes in the parchment didn't align perfectly with the rest of the book, suggesting the map might have been inserted long after the original book was bound. Perhaps most tellingly, the Latin text on the map itself contained paleographic quirks and phrases that some linguists argued were anachronistic, a modern forger's attempt to imitate medieval Latin based on a reading of the very sagas the map was meant to validate. Yet the debate has never been completely settled. A small but passionate group of scholars continues to challenge the findings, arguing that the sampling of the ink was flawed or that the presence of anatase could be explained by contamination over the centuries. They point to the map style, which convincingly mimics other 15th century works, and the compelling way it integrates the Vinland geography with the known world. The emotional appeal of the map is undeniable. It represents a lost history we all wish were true. Ultimately, the weight of evidence tilts overwhelmingly toward the conclusion that the Vinland map is an exquisite, ingenious, and heartbreakingly beautiful forgery, likely created in the early 20th century with the intent to deceive. It stands not as a window into the Norse discovery of America, but as a mirror reflecting our own deep desire to touch the past and to find simple, elegant proof for complex historical truths. The real Viking voyages to North America are not diminished by this forgery. They are confirmed by archaeology at sites like Elance Orks Meadows. The Vinland map, in the end, is a different kind of artifact altogether, a testament not to medieval exploration but to modern cunning, and a permanent reminder that when a discovery seems too perfect to be true, it very often is. While the Vinland map remains a captivating but dubious enigma, our next cartographic treasure offers a rock-solid, undisputed landmark in the story of American discovery. Tucked away in the Naval Museum of Madrid is a large, hand-painted chart that feels almost like a living witness. This is the map of Juan de la Cosa, the Cantabrian pilot and master navigator who sailed with Christopher Columbus on his first 2 voyages and later with Amerigo Vespucci. Created in the year 1500, it is the single most important cartographic artifact from the dawn of the age of exploration, for one simple, breathtaking reason. It is the very first known map to show the continent of America. Juan de la Cosa was no armchair cartographer. He was a man of the sea, and this map is drawn from the visceral, first-hand experience of having been there. He likely crafted it in the port city of Puerto Santa Maria as a report to his sovereigns, Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand, a tangible record of what their daring investments had yielded. The map is a magnificent hybrid, a beautiful and functional portolan chart painted on 2 joined pieces of parchment, stretching nearly 6 feet across. At first glance, it follows the traditional style, showing Europe and Africa with a familiar, if slightly updated, accuracy. But then your eye is drawn westward across the Atlantic to the new lands that utterly transform the image. There, in vibrant color and gold leaf, is the New World, the Caribbean islands that Columbus's fleet explored. Hispaniola, Cuba, Jamaica, and the Lesser Antilles are clearly depicted with flags of Castile and Leon planted firmly upon them, declaring Spanish possession. Puerto Rico is shown, named as San Juan Bautista, but the map's most revolutionary feature lies to the south. Below the islands, de la Cosa has drawn a long, continuous coastline running east to west. He labels it with a simple yet monumental phrase, Mar descubert por Anglesey's Sea, discovered by the English. This is a reference to the voyages of John Cabot, who had reached the northern mainland a few years earlier. However, the coastline itself, with its distinctive bulging shape, is unmistakably the northern coast of South America, which de la Cosa himself had helped explore on the voyage of Alonso de Ojeda in 1499. This representation is a stunning piece of geographical intuition. De la Cosa did not yet know this was a separate continent. The idea of America was still years away. But by connecting these various landfalls into a single, massive coastline, he was visually asserting that these were not mere islands off the coast of Asia, as Columbus still fervently believed. This was something enormous, something entirely new, a landmass of a scale that demanded a complete rethinking of the world's geography. The map is a silent argument drawn in ink and paint against the stubborn beliefs of its own commissioner. Beyond its historical primacy, the map is also a poignant and personal document. In a small illustration off the coast of West Africa, de la Cosa drew a picture of Saint Christopher carrying the Christ child across a river. Next to the saint stands a much smaller figure, a man kneeling in prayer. This is widely believed to be a self-portrait of Juan de la Cosa himself, giving thanks for surviving the perilous voyages and perhaps seeking divine protection for those to come. It is a humble, human moment on a map that charts a world revolutionized. Tragically, his prayers for future safety would go unanswered. Just a few years later, in 1510, de la Cosa was killed in a skirmish with indigenous people in present-day Colombia, a testament to the very real dangers that underpin the creation of this beautiful chart. The Juan de la Cosa map is therefore much more than a collection of coastlines. It is a snapshot of a worldview in violent, breathtaking transition. It captures the precise moment when the medieval conception of a three-part world, Europe, Africa, and Asia, irrevocably shattered, making way for a new, vaster, and more mysterious globe. It is the birth certificate of the Americas, drawn by a man who helped midwife their discovery, and it remains an enduring tribute to the skill, courage, and evolving understanding of the explorers who dared to redraw the boundaries of the known world. While the practical maps of navigators and the scientific atlases of scholars were reshaping the European understanding of a physical world, a very different cartographic tradition persisted, one that rejected the emerging reality of continents and oceans in favor of a timeless theological truth. This brings us to the year 1581, in the German city of Hanover, where a Lutheran theologian and cartographer named Heinrich Bunting published a work that would become one of the most delightfully strange and symbolically potent maps in history. In his book Itinerarium Sacri Scripturae, or Travel Book Through Holy Scripture, Bunting included a world map that utterly defies geographical sense. This is not a map for sailing or for understanding spatial relationships. It is a map for the soul, a visual sermon carved from parchment, and it depicts the entire inhabited world as a perfect three-leafed clover. At first glance, the Bunting cloverleaf map, or Die Gans Welt in einem Kleberblatt as it was originally titled, seems almost childish in its simplicity. The known world is presented as three distinct petals joined at a single central point. The top leaf represents Asia, the largest and most grand of the three, occupying fully half of the design. The bottom left leaf is Europe, and the bottom right is Africa. These three continents are surrounded not by a recognizable ocean, but by a wide, circular band of water, and beyond that, 12 wind heads puff their cheeks to blow air across this divine garden. But the map's true focal point, the hinge upon which this entire symbolic universe turns, is the circle at the very center where the three leaves meet. Inside that circle is a single, walled city labeled unmistakably Jerusalem. This design was no mere artistic whim. For Bunting, a devout Christian scholar, the map was a profound statement of faith, a literal illustration of a passage from the book of Isaiah which states, "Thus saith the Lord God, this is Jerusalem. I have set it in the midst of the nations and countries that are round about her." The cloverleaf shape was a direct and intentional allusion to the Holy Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, three distinct entities united as one. By shaping the world as a clover, Bunting was asserting that the entire earth, in its very structure, was a reflection of God's nature. Jerusalem's central placement was not a geographical claim but a theological one. It was the spiritual center of creation, the site of Christ's crucifixion and resurrection, and thus the axis around which all human history and salvation revolved. The map is filled with other biblical references that reinforce its purpose as a tool for understanding Scripture, not geography. The Garden of Eden is shown in Asia, located at the very top of the map near a depiction of Noah's Ark resting on the mountains of Ararat. The Red Sea is painted a vivid red, and the path of the Israelites' exodus from Egypt is clearly marked. The Mediterranean Sea is reduced to a narrow river separating Europe and Africa. Real-world locations like England and Spain are dwarfed and squeezed into the edges of the European leaf, their shapes utterly distorted to fit the symbolic framework. This was of no concern to Bunting. Accuracy was irrelevant when the goal was to depict a higher spiritual reality. The map was a mnemonic device, a way to visually organize the events of the Bible within a conceptual landscape that prioritized sacred meaning over terrestrial fact. The Bunting Cloverleaf map stands as a magnificent and fascinating outlier, a last gasp of a purely symbolic medieval worldview at a time when the scientific cartography of Mercator and Ortelius was steadily taking hold. It represents a different way of knowing the world, one where faith provided a more reliable map than measurement. It reminds us that maps are never just about location. They are about ideology, belief, and the stories we tell ourselves to make sense of our place in the cosmos. In an age of increasing global discovery, Bunting's map offered a comforting certainty. No matter how large the physical world became, the spiritual world still had a fixed, holy, and perfectly designed center. While European maps of the late 14th century were still largely dominated by the mystical and symbolic traditions of the Mappa Mundi, a world away in the halls of the Ming dynasty, Chinese cartographers were assembling a vision of the globe that was staggering in its scope, its ambition, and its administrative precision. This is the Daming Hanyi Tu, the amalgamated map of the Great Ming Empire, and to see it is to witness a completely different philosophy of what a map could be. Created around 1389, just 2 decades into the dynasty founded by the Hongwu Emperor, this map is a monumental declaration of power and knowledge. Painted on silk and measuring over 4.5 meters wide, it is not merely a map of China, but a map of the entire known world, stretching from the Atlantic coast of Africa in the west to the islands of Japan in the east, and from the steppes of Mongolia in the north to the islands of Indonesia in the south. It is a breathtaking panorama of Ming ambition, drawn with a confident authority that places the Middle Kingdom literally and figuratively at the center of everything. The most immediate and powerful statement of the map is its perspective. China is not just included, it is magnified, dominating the center of the composition with a level of detail that is utterly absent elsewhere. Every province, every major river system like the Yangtze and the Yellow River, every mountain range and walled city is rendered with meticulous care. This is the core of the civilized world, the realm of order and administration under the mandate of heaven. Radiating out from this detailed core, the rest of the world gradually fades into a more generalized, though still remarkably accurate, periphery. Korea is drawn as a distinct and respectfully large peninsula, a nod to its status as a tributary state. Japan floats off the coast, slightly distorted but clearly recognizable. Southeast Asia is present, with the Malay Peninsula and the islands of Sumatra and Java all labeled. But the map's true genius lies in its westward gaze. The Daming Hanyi Tu depicts the entirety of the Silk Road, tracing the routes through Central Asia that had connected China to the west for over 1,000 years. Most astonishingly, it shows the Arabian Peninsula, the Red Sea, and the entire continent of Africa drawn with a recognizably triangular shape, albeit pointing eastward instead of south. This inclusion of Africa is what makes the map so revolutionary and so perplexing to historians. How did Chinese cartographers in the 1380s possess such a seemingly comprehensive understanding of the world's geography? The answer lies not in naval exploration, but in the synthesis of knowledge. The Ming compilers did not start from scratch. They were heirs to a rich cartographic tradition dating back centuries, and they almost certainly had access to maps and knowledge from the previous Yuan dynasty, which was part of the vast Mongol Empire. The Pax Mongolica of the 13th and 14th centuries had created an unprecedented era of connectivity across Eurasia. Along the Silk Road, alongside silk and spices, flowed information. Arab traders and scholars, who themselves had extensive knowledge of the African coast from their own Indian Ocean trade networks, would have carried geographical data deep into Central Asia, where it could be acquired, translated, and incorporated by Chinese officials. The Daming Hanyi Tu is therefore a powerful physical document of pre-modern globalization, a stunning fusion of Chinese, Central Asian, and Islamic geographical knowledge into a single, cohesive world picture. Yet for all its impressive scope, the map's primary purpose was likely domestic and ideological, not exploratory. It was almost certainly designed as a tool for administration and a symbol of imperial prestige. For the newly established Ming court, asserting control over a vast territory required a visual representation of that domain. This map would have allowed the emperor and his ministers to visualize the empire's commanderies, its tax bases, and its strategic frontiers. But it also showed something more. It depicted the all under heaven, the traditional Chinese concept of the world order, with the Ming emperor at its center, surrounded by a concentric rings of influence. The detailed inner ring was the administered empire. The next ring consisted of tributary states like Korea and Annam, Vietnam. The outer ring, comprising places like Africa and Europe, represented the lands of the outer barbarians, those who lived beyond the pale of Chinese civilization but were still, in theory, part of its cosmic purview. By placing these distant lands on the map, the Ming were not expressing a desire to visit them, but were making a statement about their own encompassing worldview, a world where every kingdom, no matter how remote, had a place in relation to the glorious center of the Middle Kingdom. The Daming Hunyi Tu is a masterful work of cartography, but it is also a profound work of political philosophy drawn in silk and ink. Yet even as the Ming court was consolidating its worldview onto a single grand silk map, a very different kind of cartographic mystery was brewing in the seafaring Republic of Venice, one that would later ignite fierce debate and tantalize explorers for centuries. Our journey now takes us to the year 1558, when a Venetian nobleman named Niccolo Zeno published a map and a book that made an extraordinary claim. He presented the work as based on the travels and charts of his illustrious ancestors, the Zeno brothers, who had allegedly undertaken a daring voyage of discovery in the North Atlantic more than 200 years earlier in the 1300s. This was the Zeno map, and it purported to show not only the familiar lands of Iceland and Greenland, but also a mysterious landmass to the west called Estatiland and a place named Drogeo, lands that some would later argue were nothing less than a pre-Columbian glimpse of the North American coastline. According to Niccolo Zeno's accompanying narrative, his ancestor, Niccolo the Elder, had been shipwrecked on the island of Frislanda around the year 1380. He was rescued by a prince named Zichmni, with whom he then embarked on a series of naval expeditions. They were later joined by Niccolo's brother, Antonio. Together, the brothers supposedly sailed these northern waters extensively, bringing back detailed accounts and charts of lands far to the west of Iceland. The map published in 1558 was presented as a reconstruction of these lost charts, and it depicts a North Atlantic utterly transformed from any known contemporary map. A large, fictional island named Friesland is shown southeast of Iceland, and to the west of that, a substantial coastline labeled Estatiland is drawn, complete with forests, mountains, and a ruler who possessed Latin books and brewed beer. Further south lies Drogeo, a place described as a vast territory inhabited by cannibals, which some have interpreted as a representation of the North American mainland. For European explorers and cartographers of the 16th century, the Zeno map arrived like a thunderclap, at a time when nations were desperately searching for the Northwest Passage to Asia. Here was a map that seemed to provide historical precedent for a Western route. It was eagerly seized upon by ambitious men. The English explorer Martin Frobisher carried a copy with him on his voyages in the 1570s, convinced that the fictional Friesland was a real place he could claim for the English crown. He even believed he had found it when he sighted the coast of Greenland, leading to years of navigational confusion as subsequent mapmakers dutifully copied Friesland onto their charts, creating a phantom island that would stubbornly persist for over a century. The Zeno map's influence was profound, directly shaping the cartography of the North Atlantic during the most critical era of its exploration, and sending countless sailors on fruitless searches for lands that existed only in a story. Almost from the moment of its publication, however, skeptical voices questioned the map's authenticity. The sheer abundance of blatantly fictional islands was a major red flag. Friesland itself has no counterpart in reality, and other phantom isles like Icaria and Padanda clutter the chart. Critics argued that the geography of Greenland is severely distorted, and the shape of Estertilland bears only the most superficial resemblance to any part of North America's eastern seaboard. The most damning evidence, however, comes from the map itself. Modern analysis suggests that the coastlines of Greenland and other northern regions on the Zeno map align suspiciously well with maps that were only produced in the early 16th century, particularly those from the influential Olaus Magnus map of 1539. It appears that the creator of the Zeno map had access to these newer sources, not just a 200-year-old family chart. This has led most modern scholars to a compelling conclusion: that Niccolo Zeno the Younger was likely the author of an elaborate and successful hoax. The theory posits that he perhaps discovered some fragmentary, half-illegible letters or charts from his seafaring ancestors, who may indeed have traded in the North Atlantic. To bring glory to his family name and insert them into the heroic narrative of exploration, he then amplified these fragments using the most up-to-date maps available in 16th century Venice, weaving them into a thrilling but largely fabricated adventure story. He wasn't merely copying, he was world-building, creating a plausible-sounding saga to lend credibility to his map. In this light, the Zeno map is not a medieval document but a Renaissance creation, a work of historical fiction cleverly disguised as a primary source. Yet, the map's legacy is a fascinating study in the power of a compelling story over objective fact. Even after being debunked, the Zeno map continues to captivate. A minority of researchers still argue for its potential basis in some genuine lost voyage, perhaps a forgotten expedition that did indeed reach the coast of Newfoundland or Labrador. They point to the detailed, if confused, descriptions of the landscape and peoples as possibly containing a kernel of truth. But whether a deliberate forgery or a well-intentioned reconstruction gone awry, the Zeno map's true importance lies in the tangible impact it had on real-world exploration. It stands as a powerful testament to the fact that a map's influence is not determined by its accuracy, but by its ability to capture the imagination and fuel the ambitions of those who believe in it, proving that sometimes the most powerful charts are those that lead us not to new lands but to new dreams. But from the grand, global visions of the Ming and the phantom islands of the Zeno map, our focus now narrows dramatically to a single city at the most critical juncture in its long and storied history. We travel to the year 1422, to the final, fading decades of the Byzantine Empire. Its glorious capital, Constantinople, once the unrivaled metropolis of Christendom, is now a shadow of its former self, a densely populated island of Byzantine culture surrounded by a rising tide of Ottoman power. And in this precarious moment, a Florentine priest and scholar named Cristoforo Buondelmonte created something extraordinary: the oldest surviving detailed map of the city. This isn't just a chart, it is a precious and poignant portrait of a civilization on the brink, a meticulous snapshot of the Queen of Cities just 31 years before she would fall to the Ottoman siege. Buondelmonte arrived in Constantinople as part of the Renaissance's rekindled fascination with the Greek world, seeking out ancient manuscripts and classical knowledge. But what he produced was far more immediate than a historical text. His map, drawn from his own meticulous observations during his stay, is a vibrant bird's-eye view of the urban landscape. Unlike the symbolic representations of cities on earlier Mappa Mundi, Buondelmonte's work strives for a new kind of accuracy, a sense of being there. He depicts the city not as an abstract collection of symbols, but as a living, breathing entity with its dense web of streets, its formidable defenses, and its breathtaking architectural marvels, all rendered with a cartographer's eye for spatial relationships. The most dominant feature on the map is, without question, the legendary Theodosian walls. Buondelmonte draws them with immense care, showing the complex multi-layered system of inner and outer walls, the deep moat, and the nearly 100 towering bastions that had made Constantinople impregnable for 1,000 years. Seeing them mapped in such detail just a generation before they were finally breached by Ottoman cannon fire is both awe-inspiring and deeply tragic. These were the walls that had turned back armies of Avars, Arabs, and Bulgars, and here they are, captured in their final years of defiant strength. He also meticulously charts the seawalls along the Golden Horn and the Sea of Marmara, emphasizing the city's unique and formidable natural position, a peninsula guarded on 2 sides by water and on the third by the greatest fortifications ever built by the ancient world. Within these walls, Buondelmonte guides our eye to the heart of Byzantine power and faith. The great palace of the emperors, though by this time partly in ruins and a symbol of the empire's diminished wealth, is still noted. The sprawling hippodrome is clearly drawn, its long racetrack and central spina still the stage for public life. But towering above everything, both physically and symbolically, is the great cathedral of Hagia Sophia. Buondelmonte captures its massive scale and its defining feature, the breathtaking, revolutionary dome that had crowned the city's skyline for nearly 9 centuries. He shows it not as a generic church symbol, but with its specific, recognizable form, a testament to its enduring power as an architectural and spiritual icon. The map is also dotted with countless other churches and monasteries, each one labeled, creating a portrait of a city that was, above all else, a sacred landscape. This was the bulwark of Eastern Orthodoxy, and every corner seemed to hold a place of worship. Buondelmonte includes the Church of the Holy Apostles, the second most important church in the city and the burial place of emperors, and many others whose names would be lost to history or converted into mosques after the conquest. He even details the city's vital infrastructure, like the vast open-air cistern of Etios, one of the many enormous reservoirs that ensured the city's water supply during a siege. This attention to practical detail makes the map feel like a true strategic overview, not just a tourist sketch. What makes the Buondelmonte map so emotionally resonant is its timing. It is the last detailed look at the Byzantine capital in its final incarnation. When we look at it, we are seeing the city as a Byzantine citizen, a Venetian merchant, or the last emperors of the Palaiologos dynasty would have seen it. We see the urban fabric that would soon be irrevocably altered. Churches would be transformed, palaces would be repurposed, and new Ottoman monuments would rise to dominate the skyline. The map freezes a moment of tense equilibrium, a deep breath before the storm. It is a cartographic memory of a world that was about to vanish forever, drawn by an outsider whose work became the most important visual record we have of the glorious, wounded, and resilient city of Constantinople in its final days. But from the poignant realism of Constantinople's final days, we now voyage north into a world where geography surrenders completely to imagination, where the sea itself becomes a stage for the monstrous and the marvelous. Our journey brings us to the year 1539 and to the creative mind of a Swedish Catholic priest named Olaus Magnus, who, in exile from his Protestant-dominated homeland, produced one of the most spectacularly bizarre and captivating maps ever inked, the Carta Marina. This was not merely a map of Scandinavia. It was an epic drama painted on 9 large woodcut panels, a terrifying and magnificent panorama where every wave seemed to hide a new terror and every coastal forest whispered with ancient legend. The map's full title, Carta Marina et Descriptio Septentrionalium Terrarum, meaning Marine Map and Description of the Northern Lands, only hints at its true nature. Olaus Magnus intended it as a corrective. He felt that the south-centric maps of Europe, like those from the Italian schools, vastly misrepresented his native north, depicting it as a primitive, empty wasteland. He sought to counter this ignorance with encyclopedic detail, but his method was unique. He blended the hard-won geographical knowledge of Scandinavian sailors and fishermen with the rich, unshakable tapestry of their oral traditions, their fears, and their folklore. The result is a map where confirmed fact and believed fiction exist side by side, given equal weight and artistic flourish. The geography itself was, for its time, stunningly accurate. He presents the Scandinavian peninsula with a shape we would recognize today, clearly showing the Gulf of Bothnia separating Sweden and Finland, and the rugged coastline of Norway with its deep, sword-cut fjords. He populates the land with cities, churches, and scenes of daily life, miners extracting ore from the hills, merchants trading goods, and even a depiction of the majestic elk, which he notes can be captured by hunters who cunningly saw partly through the trees it rubs against, causing the tree to fall and trap the animal. This attention to the economic and cultural reality of the North was groundbreaking, yet it is the surrounding ocean that truly steals the show, transforming from empty space into a chaotic bestiary of the deep. The seas around Iceland, Norway, and the North Atlantic are a menagerie of nightmares and wonders, each creature meticulously drawn and accompanied by a descriptive legend. Here, a colossal pristator, or sawfish, attacks a ship with its serrated snout. There, a zygaena, a hammerhead shark with horns, menaces a smaller vessel. A giant lobster, or cancer, clasps a struggling sailor in its claw. But these are merely the plausible threats. The map truly ignites the imagination with its more fantastical inhabitants. The Rosmaris, a walrus depicted as a tusked sea elephant, basks on an ice floe. The Hydra, a magnificent seven-headed sea serpent, coils through the waves. Most famous of all is the Icelandic whale, or Baelna, shown as a monstrous, island-like beast with water spouting from a blowhole on its head and enormous, demonic eyes. Its back so large that sailors are shown mistakenly landing on it to build a cooking fire, only to be plunged into the abyss when the creature dives. These illustrations were not mere decorative whimsy. They were a sophisticated visual language of danger and the unknown. For sailors navigating these treacherous, fog-shrouded waters, the ocean was an inherently hostile and mysterious realm. Unexplained disappearances, sudden storms, and strange sightings were rationalized through these creatures. A violent, unexpected squall might be attributed to the threshing of a great serpent's tail. The sudden, powerful pull of a whirlpool off the coast of Norway, which Olaus depicts with terrifying spirals, could be explained as the sucking maw of a subterranean monster. The map served as both a warning and an explanation, giving tangible form to the very real perils of northern navigation. It validated the fears of mariners by documenting them in a respected, published work. The Carta Marina is therefore a monumental work of ethnography as much as it is of cartography. Olaus Magnus was not just mapping land and sea, he was mapping the Scandinavian mind. He was capturing a worldview where the boundaries between the natural and the supernatural were porous, where the environment was alive with intelligent, often malevolent forces. It stands as the last great embodiment of the medieval tradition of the Mappa Mundi, where the edges of the map are places of wonder and peril, but it is also fiercely specific and detailed, a herald of the more scientific age to come. It is a breathtaking paradox, a map that is both wildly imaginative and deeply informative, a terrifying and beautiful monument to the power of human fear and wonder to shape our understanding of the world. Yet this interpretation is not without its own compelling counterpoints. The most significant hurdle is the sheer timescale involved. For Queen Maud Land to have been ice-free and accurately mapped, the source material would need to originate from a period before the current Antarctic ice sheet formed, a process that began millions of years ago, long before any known human civilization could have existed. Proponents of the ancient civilization theory are forced to posit the existence of a completely unknown, highly advanced seafaring culture in deep prehistory, one that possessed the technology for transoceanic voyages and precise cartography, yet left no other discernible archaeological trace anywhere on Earth. This stretches credulity for most mainstream historians and geologists, for whom the absence of evidence is a powerful argument against the theory. A more grounded and widely accepted explanation lies in the nature of Portolan chart-making itself and the geographical theories of the time. The Piri Reis map is a compilation, a patchwork of different sources stitched together. The southern landmass is far more likely a composite of several contemporary ideas. Firstly, it could represent the eastern coast of South America, massively distorted and pulled southward due to the common practice of aligning coastlines to the rheum lines radiating from the compass roses. Portuguese explorers may have ventured further south along the Argentine coast than officially recorded, and their rough sketches of a long, continuous coastline could have been misinterpreted as a separate continent. Secondly, and perhaps more convincingly, the landform aligns perfectly with a powerful geographical myth that persisted from Ptolemy's time right through the Renaissance, the belief in a vast terra australis incognita, a great southern continent theorized to exist as a counterbalance to the landmasses of the northern hemisphere. This was not a fringe idea but a central tenet of European geography. Mapmakers like Piri Reis, working with partial information, would have felt compelled to include this hypothetical land, often drawing it as a large, ambiguous shape at the bottom of the world. The details on the Piri Reis map, the animals, the topography, could then be explained as artistic conjecture, filling in the blanks of a theoretical land with features imagined or borrowed from traveler accounts of southern regions. Furthermore, the argument that the map shows a pre-glacial coastline relies heavily on a subjective comparison between the Piri Reis outline and modern sub-ice topographic maps of Antarctica. Critics point out that this requires a significant amount of selective interpretation, ignoring areas where the fit is poor and focusing only on areas where it appears coincidentally strong, a classic case of apophenia, or seeing patterns where none exist. The map lacks the scale and precise projection needed for such a detailed comparison to be scientifically valid. What appears to be a river system to some might just as easily be the mapmaker's attempt to depict a rugged coastline with inlets and bays, or even mere decorative flourishes. Ultimately, the Antarctica mystery surrounding the Piri Reis map is a fascinating case study in how we project our own desires onto the artifacts of the past. We are drawn to the romantic idea of lost knowledge and forgotten civilizations, a narrative far more thrilling than the more probable, albeit less sensational, explanation of cartographic conflation and educated guesswork. The map's true power may not lie in proving the existence of ancient advanced explorers, but in its ability to vividly capture the spirit of its own era, a time when the world was simultaneously expanding and shrinking, when hard-won empirical data bled seamlessly into deeply held myth, and when a single piece of parchment could contain both the measured coast of Brazil and the dream unknown world at the end of the earth. It is a testament to the enduring human urge to fill blank spaces on the map, whether with accurate surveys or with the magnificent shapes of our own imagination. Yet the true genius of Ortelius's Theatrum Orbis Terrarum lay not merely in its beautiful compilation, but in a revolutionary idea embedded in its very first edition, a list. Titled Catalogus Auctorum, this bibliography named 87 cartographers and over 33 contemporary maps that Ortelius had consulted. This single act of academic transparency was arguably as transformative as the maps themselves. For the first time, a reader could see the sources behind the knowledge, understanding that geography was not received dogma but a collaborative, evolving field of study built upon the work of others. This established a new standard of intellectual honesty in publishing, inviting scrutiny, verification, and a shared pursuit of accuracy that moved map-making further from art and closer to science. It transformed the atlas from a static assertion of fact into a living, debatable document, a conversation between the past and present that future mapmakers were now obliged to join. This standardized, citable format created a powerful commercial and intellectual engine that drove the entire industry forward. Prior to the theatrum, map publishing was a scattered, almost haphazard affair. A printer in Venice might produce a map of Italy based on local knowledge, while one in Antwerp might print a chart of the North Sea, with no consistency in scale, style, or even basic facts between them. Ortelius's model changed everything. By binding uniform maps in a single volume, he created a product that was both luxurious and incredibly useful. Its runaway success, published in 42 editions and translated into 7 languages within his lifetime, proved there was a massive market for such a comprehensive reference work. This commercial incentive spurred a fierce but productive competition, most notably with his friend and rival Gerardus Mercator, who would later coin the term atlas for his own competing work. The theatrum didn't just sell copies, it created an entire new publishing genre, forcing every subsequent cartographer to meet its high standard of presentation, organization, and scope if they wished to compete. The ripple effects of this standardization fundamentally shaped the European worldview during the most rapid period of global discovery. As new information poured in from Dutch, English, and Spanish voyages, Ortelius and his publishers regularly issued updated editions of the theatrum. A nobleman in Prague or a merchant in London could purchase a new edition and, in a single evening, absorb the latest wonders, the refined shape of South America, the emerging outline of North America, or the latest speculations about the mythical southern continent, Terra Australis. This created a shared, constantly evolving geographical consciousness across the continent. Leaders could make informed decisions about trade and colonization based on the same visual data. The very concept of the world as a knowable, interconnected whole, which we take for granted today, was in many ways cemented by the wide distribution of Ortelius's work. It made the staggering scale and diversity of the age of discovery comprehensible, manageable, and exciting for an entire generation. Perhaps the most enduring testament to Ortelius's legacy is found in the work of those he inspired. The next generation of great cartographers, like the Blieu family in Amsterdam, did not seek to overthrow his model. They sought to perfect it, creating ever more lavish and detailed atlas that were direct descendants of the theatrum. His systematic approach provided the foundational framework upon which all modern cartography is built. The very act of reaching for a world atlas today, whether on a library shelf or a digital screen, is an action that Abraham Ortelius defined and popularized. He gave us the blueprint for organizing spatial knowledge, proving that to understand the world, one must first be able to hold it page by page in their hands. His was not the first map of the world, but it was the first to truly convince the world that it could all be contained within a single, magnificent book. To truly understand the Hereford Mappa Mundi is to learn a new visual language, one where every symbol, every creature, and every drawn line is a word in a grand theological story. This map was never intended to guide a traveler's body. Its sole purpose was to guide a soul toward salvation, and every element was meticulously designed to serve that higher goal. The further one's eye travels from the holy center of Jerusalem, the more the world transforms, reflecting a medieval mindset that equated geographical distance with spiritual and moral peril. The edges of the map are not just blank spaces, they are actively antagonistic realms, filled with the monstrous races described by ancient authors like Pliny the Elder and St. Augustine. These were not pure fantasy to the medieval viewer, they were logical if terrifying possibilities. They served as proof of God's boundless creativity, but also as stark moral warnings. The Blemii, a tribe of headless men with faces on their chests, represented the ultimate otherness, beings who lived without the capacity for rational thought, which was believed to reside in the head. The Cyapods, with their single gigantic foot they used to shade themselves from the sun, symbolized a life of indolence and isolation. The Panoti, with ears so large they could be used as blankets, were perhaps a caution against gossip or hearing sinful things. These creatures populated the fringes of Asia and Africa, embodying the belief that the farther one strayed from the Christian center, the more one risked losing not just their way but their very humanity. They were a powerful deterrent, reinforcing the idea that safety, truth, and righteousness were found only within the framework of the church close to Jerusalem. Beyond these monstrous races, the map is dense with biblical and historical vignettes that turn geography into a timeline of salvation. The map doesn't just show where things are, it shows when they happened, all existing simultaneously on a single plane. You can find the Tower of Babel reaching proudly toward the heavens, a permanent reminder of human arrogance and the divine origin of different languages. The Golden Fleece hangs from a tree in Colchis, weaving classical myth into the Christian narrative. The tomb of the Prophet Muhammad is pointedly shown being tormented by demons, a clear reflection of contemporary Christian polemics against Islam. Perhaps one of the most dynamic illustrations is of Alexander the Great, being carried into the air by two griffons so he could explore the heavens, a medieval allegory for the sin of hubris, the dangerous desire for forbidden knowledge. This incredible tapestry of imagery made the map a visual sermon. A priest could use it to illustrate stories from the Bible, to point out the lands of the apostles, or to warn his congregation about the dangers that lay beyond the Christian world. It was a multimedia teaching tool for a largely illiterate populace, making complex theological concepts visible, memorable, and visceral. The society that produced this map saw the universe as a deeply hierarchical and ordered creation, and the Mappa Mundi is a perfect mirror of that structure. At the very top, outside the circular world, Christ presides over the Last Judgment, a reminder that all of human history was moving toward this final, divine reckoning. The map itself is organized into the 3 known continents, each allotted to one of the 3 sons of Noah from the book of Genesis: Shem, Asia; Japheth, Europe; and Ham, Africa. This was a way of explaining and justifying the diversity of humankind while also reinforcing a perceived natural order. Even the elements of the map itself held symbolic meaning. The surrounding ocean represents the chaotic, primordial waters that existed before creation, while the rivers that form the T-shaped boundaries are life-giving but also separating. The map is a cosmic diagram, a visual representation of the medieval belief that the physical world was a reflection of a perfect divine plan. Every city, every river, every strange creature had its designated place in God's grand design. To study the Hereford Mappa Mundi is to step inside the medieval mind, a world vibrant with meaning, charged with spiritual danger, and utterly certain of its place at the center of a universe watched over by a judging, ordering God. It is a breathtakingly ambitious attempt to capture the totality of existence, from the creation to the apocalypse, on a single sheet of vellum. And now, let's turn our gaze south to the very heart of the Catalan Atlas, where a single, stunning illustration captures the imagination and reveals a truth that would have astonished its European audience. In the vast, golden expanse representing the Sahara, the mapmaker Abraham Cresques did not draw a blank space or fill it with the usual mythical beasts. Instead, he depicted a scene of breathtaking wealth and power. Seated proudly upon a golden throne is a powerful black king, wearing a golden crown and holding in his hand an enormous, perfectly spherical gold nugget. This is no generic African ruler. The map labels him explicitly Rex Meli, the King of Mali. More specifically, this is a portrait of Mansa Musa, the 9th Mansa, or Emperor of the Mali Empire, and by the time this map was created, his name was already a legend whispered in the trading ports of the Mediterranean and shouted in the markets of Cairo. He was widely considered the wealthiest individual to have ever lived. The story behind this image is one of the most spectacular events of the medieval period, Mansa Musa's pilgrimage to Mecca in 1324. This was not a quiet religious journey. It was a procession of staggering opulence that fundamentally altered the economies of the regions it passed through. Imagine a caravan of tens of thousands of people, soldiers, officials, servants, and 12,000 slaves, each carrying a staff of pure gold. There were hundreds of camels, each burdened not with water and supplies, but with massive sacks of gold dust. Mansa Musa's objective was to fulfill one of the 5 pillars of Islam, the Hajj, but in doing so, he also intended to project the unimaginable power and sophistication of his empire onto the global stage. He succeeded beyond measure. As his caravan made its way through Egypt, Mansa Musa's generosity became the stuff of instant legend. He distributed so much gold in the streets of Cairo to the poor, to officials, to merchants, that the local economy was flooded. The value of gold in Egypt plummeted, and according to some historians, it took over a decade for the region's economy to fully recover from the inflationary shock caused by his charity. He spent and gifted gold with such abandon that he actually ran out of funds on his return journey and had to borrow money from Cairo's merchants at high interest, a move that only further illustrated his immense creditworthiness and the sheer scale of his wealth. News of this golden king from a distant land spread like wildfire through the diplomatic and merchant networks of the Mediterranean, eventually reaching the ears of scholars like Abraham Cresques in Majorca. The inclusion of Mansa Musa on the Catalan Atlas was therefore not a decorative whim. It was a critical data point. For the kings and merchants who viewed this map, it was a vital piece of intelligence. It signaled that immense, almost incomprehensible wealth lay not just in the spices of the East, but in the gold fields of West Africa. The map even charts the precise trade routes across the Sahara that made this wealth accessible, showing a camel caravan moving along a path that connects the Mediterranean coast to the heart of the Mali Empire. This was a map that said, if you want gold, this is where you will find it. It documented the Mali Empire not as a peripheral curiosity, but as a central pillar of the global medieval economy, a powerhouse whose resources were the engine for trade from the forests of West Africa to the markets of Venice and Alexandria. The Catalan Atlas, through this one powerful image, forever enshrined the reality that the African continent was home to empires every bit as powerful, sophisticated, and wealthy as those in Europe or Asia, a truth that much of Western history would later choose to forget. And so our journey across centuries and continents, guided by these 30 astonishing hand-drawn maps, finally draws to a close. We've stood in the shadow of Babylonian ziggurats, traced the footsteps of Egyptian quarry masters, and marveled at the geometric genius of Eratosthenes. We've navigated the pragmatic Roman roads, walked the sacred landscapes of the Madaba Mosaic, and pondered the divine order of the Hereford Mappa Mundi. We've witnessed the scientific synthesis of Al-Idrisi, the commercial savvy of the Catalan Atlas, and the profound global awareness of the Korean Cangnido. We've unraveled the enigmas of Piri Reis and the Zeno map, celebrated the revolutionary naming on the Wald Seemüller map, and been dazzled by the opulent propaganda of the Miller Atlas. We've even peered into the bestiary of Olaus Magnus and the spiritual geometry of Bunting's cloverleaf. Each of these maps, in its own unique way, offers so much more than a mere picture of lands and seas. They are, in their entirety, profound cultural self-portraits. Every stroke of the pen, every choice of inclusion or omission, every monster drawn at the edge of the world, and every city placed at its center, reveals the deepest values, fears, and ambitions of the people who made them. The Babylonian world map shows us a universe ordered by theology, centered on their city and surrounded by a river of chaos. The Putinger table reveals a Roman world view obsessed with connectivity, administration, and the sheer, sprawling power of an empire where all roads literally lead home. The Hereford Mappa Mundi presents a universe governed by faith, where every strange creature and biblical event has a designated place in a divine plan. These artifacts teach us that a map is never a neutral object. It is always an argument, a declaration, a prayer, or a dream rendered in ink and vellum. They are perhaps the most honest histories we possess because they show us not what the world was, but what people believed it to be. This incredible journey challenges us to look at our own modern maps with new eyes. We may have satellites and GPS rendering our planet with an accuracy these ancient cartographers could never have imagined. But our maps are no less subjective, no less revealing of our own time. What do our digital maps, with their algorithms prioritizing certain routes and certain businesses, say about our values? What does the pervasive use of the Mercator projection, quietly inflating the size of northern nations, say about the lingering shadows of historical power? We are still making choices about what to center, what to highlight, and what to leave off the map. Future historians will undoubtedly study our Google Maps and our GPS systems not just for their geographical data, but for what they reveal about our obsession with efficiency, commerce, and real-time information. They will be the cultural artifacts that tell the story of our early 21st century world. So the next time you glance at a map on your phone or unfold a paper road atlas, take a moment to see it for what it truly is. A snapshot of human understanding. It is a testament to our eternal desire to make sense of our surroundings, to find our place in the world, and to leave a record for those who will come after us. These 30 ancient maps are a powerful reminder that every explorer in every age starts with a blank page and the courage to fill it. They whisper across the centuries, not just of coastlines and rivers, but of the boundless, wonderful, and curious human spirit.